Chapter 146. When Yuucho saw that the sword could fly by itself, his eyes were already full of stars. When he saw his big brother telling him to hold it, he greedily looked at it and looked up at his father. Seeing his father nod his head, he shyly reached out to take it and held it tightly in his arms. He looked at his big brother and finally had a good impression of him. He still had the mind of a child. Yuucho smiled and said, "Wucho, can you write now?" Yuucho nodded his head and said, "I could write when I was 4. Not bad." Yuucho turned his head and shouted to Fucking, "Bring a short table over and prepare a brush, ink and paper." Fucking hurriedly went to prepare. Yuuchongue looked at his 2 sons and didn't know what they were going to do. After a while, all the tools were set up. Yuucho pointed to the table and smiled at his brother. "Wucho, big brother has something to say to you. I will speak and you write. Write down everything I say. I want to test if you can really write." Hearing him say this, Yuucho's childish eagerness to win was aroused. He walked over and put the sword on the table. He grabbed the writing brush and dipped it in the ink. He stared at his brother with big eyes, waiting for him to speak. Yuucho thought for a while and walked over to his side and said with a smile, "I am the eldest son of the family. I should be filial to my parents and share my father's worries. But I am young and frivolous. I want to pursue the great way, but the great way is vague. This road is full of ups and downs, but I must pursue it. I dare not be distracted and I am ashamed to face my parents. Today, I will take up the brush and entrust a heavy task to me." At this point, Yuucho knew what he meant and looked back at his big brother in shock. Yuuchongue's eyebrows knitted together. Yuucho pursed his lips and signaled his brother to continue writing. He sighed and said, "From today onwards, big brother's heavy responsibility will be entrusted to me. Brother must remember that when we were in the bandits' lair, big brother used the blood of hundreds of bandits to teach you. You must know that only by enduring the hardships of hardships can one rise above others. One must not indulge in riches and honor, one must guard against arrogance and rashness, one must be filial to one's parents, one must inherit the family business, and one must carry forward the family's name. Brother, I hope you will remember this great trust." After he finished speaking, he also finished writing. Although his handwriting wasn't very good, the meaning of the words was simple and clear. Yuucho was still a little confused about the great Tao in front of him. He only knew that his brother was going out to do something big, and everything in the family was going to be entrusted to him. Looking at the words on the paper, he pouted for a long time before reluctantly saying, "I will remember big brother's words." "Ha! It's good that you've remembered it. Keep what you've written well. If I come back one day and find that you've failed to do it, you're still acting like a thief in a den of thieves. You don't have any real ability, but you're still spouting nonsense. Just wait and see how I'll deal with you then." Yuucho laughed. Yuucho pouted higher and higher. Yuuchongue, on the other hand, was distressed. Originally, when he saw that his eldest son had returned, he thought that someone was going to inherit the family business. The tradition of the Xia Empire was that the eldest son would inherit the family business. Now that the eldest son had borrowed his second son's pen to express his intentions clearly, it was equivalent to indirectly answering the previous question. The path that he had walked on must be incomparably difficult, and he was afraid that it would be difficult to turn back. That's why he did this. He had put in a lot of effort. Yuuchongue couldn't say anything more. Now that his son's real situation was in front of him, he was no longer an ordinary person and couldn't force him to stay. He could only regret why he agreed to his son's request back then. He sighed and said, "Fu Qing, put up the second young master's calligraphy and hang it in his room." "Yes." Fu Qing respectfully accepted the order. Speaking of which, Fu Qing was really happy today. Master and young master would always look for him whenever something happened. His future was probably going to change. When are we leaving? Yu Changgue sighed. Yu Qianqiu was startled. He originally wanted to leave right away, but thinking that it was too much. He hadn't returned for almost 10 years, what's the matter if he delayed for a day? He smiled and replied, then let's stay one more night. Yu Changgue understood the meaning behind his words. He waved his hand and called for the servants to prepare a banquet. The father and son trio walked towards Shuaernyang. Yu Wuchou hugged the sword happily. Just as he reached the door, he saw Shuaernyang coming out. When the latter saw her youngish son, she immediately hugged him and burst into tears. Yu Qianqiu had a toothache when he heard this. They hadn't seen each other for almost 10 years, but his mother still loved to cry. Both he and his father turned their heads to the side. Ah! How did my son become like this? Ah! Who slapped him on his face? Shuaernyang asked anxiously. Yu Changgue's face twitched. He turned his head and said, I say, are you done yet? Such a small injury will be fine in 2 days. Can't you see boss is here? Why are you crying all the time? Ah! Shuaernyang stood up. When she saw Yu Qianqiu, she threw herself at him and cried, where did my son go for so many years? Don't tell me you don't even want your mother anymore. Woo woo. Yu Qianqiu gritted his teeth and pushed her away. He smiled bitterly, Mother, your son hasn't eaten for a long time. My stomach is really hungry. Ah. Then why didn't you say so earlier? Shuaernyang wiped away her tears and said, you wait, I will personally get it for you. She then led the servant girl away. Phew. The father and son let out a breath and looked at each other. Xiao Wuchou shook his head and sighed, I really can't stand mother like this. I would rather stay in the thieves' den for a few more days. Bastard, what did you say? Yu Changgue shouted. The little fellow stuck out his tongue and quickly changed the topic, Big brother, I am too dirty. I will go take a bath first. Otherwise, I won't be able to attend the banquet later. He then ran away. Soon, the family of 4 sat at the sumptuous dinner table. With his mother's persuasion, Yu Qianqiu ate until he was full. Although it was a little uncomfortable, he enjoyed the warm feeling. That night, in Yu Changgue's study room, the father and son had a deep conversation. Yu Qianqiu gave them 3 sealed porcelain bottles as an explanation. After that, Yu Qianqiu asked someone to invite his mother over. In front of the 2 elders, he took out 2 rui elixirs that were shining with rainbow light and handed them to them. The couple looked at the beads in their hands with their mouths agape. After a long time, Yu Changgue was moved and said, is this an immortal elixir? Yu Qianqiu smiled indifferently and said, more or less. Father, mother, just take it. This elixir has the effect of preserving one's appearance for a long time. It can also detoxify and nourish one's appearance. After taking it, one will be immune to all kinds of poison. However, there are some side effects after taking it. You have to be prepared beside the toilet bowl and bathtub. Hearing the benefits, the couple directly filtered out the side effects. Yu Changgue solemnly swallowed the rainbow light into his mouth. However, he was not used to this quail egg-sized thing, so it took a lot of effort to swallow it down his throat. Shuaernyang was about to swallow it, but she stopped and said, I think I don't need it. Leave it for your brother. Have you used it before, my son? Yu Qianqiu sighed in his heart. All mothers in the world were great. He smiled and said, my brother is still young. Do you want him to stay like this for the rest of his life? I will take care of his matters. Mother, you don't have to worry too much. As for the elixir, I have already used it. You can take it with ease. Only then did Shuaernyang feel at ease and swallow it. After coming out, he did not sleep in his original room that night. Instead, he slept with his brother. He told the boy many things, but he did not know if he could remember them. The next morning, the family could no longer find him. Only then did they realize that Yu Qianqiu had left quietly. Yu Changgue stood in the garden with his son, who was holding a sword. The former let out a long sigh. Chapter 147. Yu Qianqiu originally wanted to spend the night peacefully before leaving. After lying in bed with his brother and chatting for a while, the little fellow fell asleep in a daze, perhaps because he was too tired. Looking at the sleeping little fellow, Yu Qianqiu felt emotional. He considered if he should help the little fellow to a position that ordinary people couldn't reach. After some thought, he gave up. This family didn't have many people to begin with, and he was leaving. Furthermore, no one knew what the future held for them. Sometimes, there were some things that he wasn't confident in. If he wasn't careful, he might bring disaster to the family. It was best to let the family live peacefully. He tried his best not to let them get involved in those illusory matters. He could do whatever he wanted alone. Having a family to feed them would only be a burden to both of them. It was too dangerous. Unable to sleep late at night, Yu Qianqiu decided to leave when he thought of how his mother would definitely be crying when they parted the next day. Although he said that he was leaving, he had actually returned to Utopia in an instant. Now, any place was extremely close to him, but it was also extremely far away. It was also late at night in Utopia. However, Ethereal Palace on Ethereal Peak was like a starry sky. It was extremely charming under the embellishment of fluorite. The messy names of Ethereal Peak and Ethereal Palace were all given by Yu Qianqiu. The main reason was that he couldn't think of any good names, so he used them as if he had heard them somewhere before. As soon as Yu Qianqiu appeared in Misty Palace, he heard a familiar horn sound from afar. He turned his head to look and murmured, "Emergency assembly signal. Is Yunchang training for night raids again? Let's take a look." There was a field in the middle of a row of wooden and stone houses that took up an area of nearly 1,000 meters. At that moment, the field was surrounded by flames. A group of people rushed out of the houses and lined up neatly in 3 groups. Yu Qianqiu quietly appeared on top of a building to observe. The people in front of him were the original 400 disciples from the various sections. After eliminating the female disciples, there were 309 people left. Thus, under Yu Qianqiu's suggestion, Guanyu divided them into 3 companies. Each company had 103 people, with a company commander. Each company was further divided into 3 platoons, each platoon consisting of 34 people. Each platoon had a platoon leader. Each platoon was divided into 3 classes, and each class had 11 people. Each class had a squad leader. The 3 company commanders were 3 late nascent soul cultivators, and the platoon leaders and squad leaders were also nascent soul cultivators. At the same cultivation level, these positions were usually taken by cultivators who were good at commanding. Guanyu immediately discovered that the efficiency of training had greatly increased after the division management. In front of the field, a large black triangular flag was hung on a flagpole. If one were to look at it carefully under the light of the flames, they could vaguely see 2 large golden characters embroidered on it, "Hero." Next to the flagpole, on a stone platform, Guanyu was dressed in black, with a black scarf wrapped around his head. He swept his cold gaze across the field with an extraordinary bearing, nodding his head in satisfaction. Suddenly, he shouted in a deep voice, "Company commander, come up to the stage to receive the battle plan." He then took out 3 jade archives. The 3 men standing in front of the 3 teams rushed up to the stone platform. They each received a jade archive from Guanyu and immediately scanned it with their divine sense. Once they were done, they returned the jade archives and dashed to the front of their respective teams. The 3 of them shouted to the members of their respective teams, "Dress according to the requirements of Battle Plan Number 3. Carry the appropriate weapons. You are required to assemble within 5 minutes. Dismissed. Whoosh. In an instant, all 3 teams rushed back to their rooms. Not long after, one by one, they rushed out dressed in black, with black scarves wrapped around their heads. After they were in position, the company commanders gathered their platoon commanders and squad leaders and quickly passed down the battle plan. Finally, one by one, the company commanders reported to Guan Yu, reporting. First company is ready. Reporting. Second company is ready. Reporting. Third company is ready. Guan Yu nodded and shouted, order. Once the target has entered the encirclement, the first round of attack will be concentrated by all 3 companies. We must inflict the greatest amount of damage to the target. Once we achieve the desired effect, immediately move on to the second round of attack. First company and third company will be the main attackers, while second company will support them. Also, seize the spoils of war as fast as possible. Considering that the target may have a large number of reinforcements, once this situation is discovered, third company will immediately switch from the main attack to a defensive position. If the defensive position is not ideal, first company and second company will quickly return to support. Gather the greatest fighting strength possible and retreat quickly. If the situation becomes extremely dire, first company and second company will retreat, while third company will cover the rear. Understood. Understood. The shouts shook the heavens. With a wave of Guan Yu's hand, the company commanders turned around and shouted, move out. With the order, over 300 people pulled the black scarves from their necks to their noses, revealing only their eyes. They quickly flew into the sky, with Guan Yu following closely behind. In an instant, the entire field became quiet, with only the flickering of fire. Standing on the roof, Yu Qianqiu shook his head and sighed, not bad. From the time of the emergency assembly to the time of departure, it took less than 10 minutes. Sigh. But their weapons are different, and their cultivation methods are also different. I wonder if they can unleash the greatest power in a group battle. Looks like I'll have to find an opportunity to drag them out and test it out. Currently, Yu Qianqiu was the only one living in the small courtyard, and it was very quiet. Yang Qian was also very perceptive. When he saw that the direct disciple of the Alchemy Pavilion's managing elder and the daughter of the 10,000 Fragrance Gardens managing elder were together, he no longer assigned anyone to this courtyard. After the death of the Alchemy Pavilion's external deacon, Yan Shu, Guan Weiwu had not found anyone to replace him. For the time being, the internal deacon, Yang Qian, was in charge of all these miscellaneous matters. He had practically become the Alchemy Pavilion's chief steward and had a lot of power. Yu Qianqiu leisurely walked towards the main hall of the Alchemy Pavilion. Many disciples would call him Martial Uncle when they saw him, and those of the same generation would greet each other. Those of a higher generation would also nod at him. As for the fact that his cultivation had already reached the core formation stage, he did not tell anyone on Fuxian Island. All in all, these days were quite comfortable. Thinking back to what Gu Qingyun had said when he saw his carefree life, he said, "You're the best." For someone of my cultivation, in a place like the Cultivation Pavilion, where experts are as common as clouds, it would be tiring to just greet and greet. It would be best for me to obediently hide and cultivate and not come out. Do you know where Deacon Yang is? Yu Qianqiu pulled a disciple over and asked. He had come to find Yang Qian. After the disciple greeted him, he told him that Yang Qian was in the main hall. When he walked into the main hall, he saw Yang Qian looking around. Deacon Yang! Yu Qianqiu shouted. Yang Qian turned around and saw that it was him. He shook his head and said with a smile, "It's really difficult to see you even once. Tell me, why did you take the initiative to find me this time? Look at what you're saying. Aren't you too busy right now? I don't want to disturb you so often." Yu Qianqiu joked. The two of them had always had a good relationship and would often joke around like this when they met. I still have things to do. If you have something to say, just say it. Young Qian said bluntly. Yu Qianchou nodded and asked, I heard that all the sects are going to send more people to the Cultivation Alliance. Is this true? You still don't know if it's true or not. Didn't the person in Wanfan Garden tell you? Young Qian smiled meaningfully. I only heard about this. I don't know the specifics. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come to disturb you. Oh. Young Qian smiled noncommittally. He paused and said, It's true. The cause is the matter between Onquangsung and the Demon Blood Palace. Both sides have stopped fighting, but this time, many sects were involved. Regarding Onquangsung always stirring up trouble, all the righteous sects in the cultivation world are very angry. Therefore, they decided to strengthen the Cultivation Alliance in name only. It will truly play a role of fair adjudication. Those sects that cause trouble will be punished together. Right now, all the sects are discussing the specifics. I reckon that in a few days, they will send people to put it into action. Yu Qianchou nodded in thought. So it was like this. He understood. Young Qian looked at him and said strangely, Why do you ask? Do you want to go? I advise you not to think about it. This kind of thing is usually led by the people of the Cultivation Pavilion. It has nothing to do with the people of the other sections. Chapter 148. What kind of logic is this? Yu Qianchou frowned. Everyone is a disciple of Fuxian Island. Why is the Cultivation Pavilion in charge of this matter? Isn't the sect being a little too biased by doing this? His voice grew louder as he spoke. He wasn't excited, but he really wanted this chance to leave the island. With the name of Fuxian Island, Onquangsung believed that everything would go smoothly. So what if the other party recognized that this Yu Qianchou was that Yu Qianchou? As long as he could see Chu Ping, or fulfill his promise, he would just deny it. He didn't believe that Onquangsung would dare to detain a disciple of Fuxian Island. Even if he took a step back, could they detain him? As for what kind of trouble he would cause, that was a matter for the future. He had been away from Chu Ping, for too long. On the surface, he looked like he was living comfortably, but who knew that there was a thorn in his throat? He couldn't eat or sleep well. He wanted to go according to his plan, but the time was too torturous. Who knew how long he would have to wait? Lower your voice. How dare you speak so carelessly? Young Qian dragged him to a remote place outside the hall. He was slightly annoyed. Who said that the sect is biased? The disciples that are sent out represent the face of supporting Immortal Island. They might encounter unexpected situations at any time. That's why the Cultivation Pavilion has to choose the most elite disciples of the same cultivation level. How can you say that the sect is biased? Don't the other branches have elite disciples? Why do we have to choose from the Cultivation Pavilion? Yu Qianchou was a little restless, so his words were a little direct. Young Qian was indeed a little angry. A Foundation establishment disciple actually dared to speak to him in such a tone. Then, he thought of the two principal elders standing behind him and calmed himself down. Then, he said earnestly, You've been on supporting Immortal Island for a long time. You have to know your priorities. What is the master? The Cultivation Pavilion was the foundation of the entire supporting Immortal Island. Every generation sect master was a principal elder of the Cultivation Pavilion, so the Cultivation Pavilion was the master. The existence of the other branches is to cooperate with the Cultivation Pavilion. This is the first time. Seeing that Yu Qianchou's face was still dark, he explained again, this trip to the Cultivation Alliance isn't like usual. We'll have to work with other sects for a long time. To put it bluntly, the people who go out are related to the reputation of Fuxian Island, the #1 sect in the world. Those who can go are the elite disciples of various cultivation periods. The sect has already decided that in addition to appointing a Pavilion of Cultivation elder as the person in charge, 3 days from now, there will be a selection competition at the Pavilion of Cultivation to select 5 nascent soul disciples and 10 core formation disciples. Foundation establishment disciples will not be included. His last sentence was undoubtedly telling Yu Qianqiu, "You're still in the foundation establishment stage, don't count on it." Yu Qianqiu furrowed his brows and asked, "What kind of screening method? Did the sect stipulate that only disciples of the Pavilion of Cultivation can participate?" "No, as long as you're in the nascent soul or core formation stage, you can participate. The nascent soul disciples will be in the top 5, and the core formation disciples will be in the top 10. However, according to convention, the other branches won't participate. In fact, they don't have to participate. You can imagine the result. On one side are disciples who have no time to cultivate, and on the other side are disciples who put all their energy into cultivation. Among the disciples of the same level, how many can be a match for the Pavilion of Cultivation?" Yu Qianqiu happily said, "Deacon Yang, if I want to participate, where do I go to sign up?" Seeing that this guy still didn't give up, Yang Qian said with a slightly unhappy expression, "What? Did you just ignore what I just said? Didn't you hear me say that foundation establishment disciples can't participate?" "Who said I'm a foundation establishment disciple?" said Yu Qianqiu with a smile. He stretched out a palm and a plume of smoke rose up from his palm. In an instant, 3 Bingdi lotuses were condensed, swaying in the wind in a lifelike manner. 2 of the lotuses were in full bloom. The other one was still a bud and hadn't bloomed yet, but it clearly told the other party that his cultivation had reached the early stage of core formation. Early stage of core formation. Yang Qian was dumbstruck. If he remembered correctly, when Yu Qianqiu first came to Fuxian Island, he was only at the 10th level of qi refining. It had only been 6 or 7 years, but he had already reached the early stage of core formation. How was this possible? But the truth was right in front of him. Without this cultivation, it was impossible to release one's vitality and form 3 vivid twin lotuses. Yang Qian's throat trembled. He himself had spent more than 50 years to reach the early stage of core formation, which was not bad. After a long time, he said, "Core formation disciples can go to Pinglai Pavilion's utility hall to register for the competition." Suddenly, he remembered something and changed the topic. "Wait for me here, don't leave yet." With that, he ran away. Yu Qianqiu was startled and didn't know what he was going to do. After waiting for a while, he saw Yang Qian and Guan Weiwu rushing over. He groaned in his heart. "Damn it. Looks like I have to bleed a little this time. Otherwise, I won't be able to fool them." Guan Weiwu walked up to him and asked with a serious expression, "Are you really at the early stage of core formation? What is going on? You should know that this is not a small matter." Yu Qianqiu bowed and said, "It's all my fault. I shouldn't have hidden it from you. I have something to say to you in private. I also want to go to your pill room to show you something." "You want to go to my pill room?" Guan Weiwu's eyes flashed as he looked at his favorite disciple and said, "Follow me." Yu Qianqiu obediently followed his master to the elder's pill room under the alchemy pavilion. Yang Qian knew that the master and disciple had something private to talk about, so he didn't follow. Guan Weiwu turned around and said, "There's only the 2 of us here. If you have something to say, say it." Yu Qianqiu embarrassedly said, "I deserve to die. I shouldn't have hidden it from you. In fact, I have long since developed a better method to make the vitality pill. However, I was blinded by greed and secretly made a lot of it for myself. That's why I was able to forcefully raise my cultivation to the core formation stage in a few years." His voice became softer and softer as if he had made a huge mistake. "What?" Guan Weiwu cried out in surprise. "Is what you said true?" Then, his face was full of surprise. He eagerly rubbed his palms and regretfully said, "Why didn't you say so earlier? AI. Why didn't you say so earlier? Damn it. If it wasn't for this competition and the fact that the 10,000 fragrance garden has a limited supply of spirit herbs, I wouldn't have said it even if I was beaten to death." Yu Qianqiu muttered in his heart and explained, "Actually, I wanted to tell Master long ago, but I made a mistake first, so I didn't dare to say it. This time, I heard that there is a competition at the Cultivation Pavilion, but no one from my Alchemy Pavilion is participating. This disciple can't take this lying down and wants to compete with the disciples of the Cultivation Pavilion. That's why I said this. I hope Master can see this disciple's sincerity and help this disciple out of this predicament. This disciple promises not to do this again. Let's not talk about this for now. There are spirit herbs for refining the vitality pill. First, refine a furnace for me to see." Guan Weiwu pointed to a pile of spirit herbs to the side with an anxious expression. Yu Qianqiu shook his head with a bitter smile and said, "The Pavilion of Cultivation's competition requires those who are at least core formation to participate. Because of this, I revealed my cultivation level. I thought about how I would refine pills for myself. I don't know what the consequences would be if word got out. Right now, my heart is in a mess. How could I still have the mood to refine pills?" Guan Weiwu was surprised and immediately shouted, "Who dares to say that you did it for yourself? If anyone dares to say that, tell them to come find me. Everything was clearly arranged by me, so what are you worried about?" He then laughed mischievously and said, "Good disciple, come, refine a furnace for Master to see. Master will take care of everything else for you, so you don't need to worry." Chapter 149. AI. This kind of thing, he could only fool him. In fact, he didn't know how many origin chi pills he would need to take to break through from foundation establishment to core formation. To be able to be so fast was all because of the top-grade spirit stones. Yu Qianqiu bowed to the ground again. "Thank you, Master, for your help. No need to be so polite. Quickly let Master see how you refine the origin chi pills." Guan Weiwu couldn't wait any longer. Yu Qianqiu immediately picked up a few spiritual herbs, threw them into the furnace, and concentrated on refining. Guan Weiwu's divine sense followed and once again witnessed his disciple's miraculous refining technique. He shook his head and sighed. He couldn't figure out what was going on. With his own alchemy attainments, he couldn't learn such a technique. Yu Qianqiu also couldn't figure out why his master was so stupid. Even that brat Chen Feng had learned his refining technique quite well, but he still couldn't get the hang of it. Perhaps it was because he didn't teach him diligently. But he was his master, and the disciple teaching his master was too embarrassing for anyone to ask. Yu Qianqiu actually didn't know that his refining technique was actually faster for newcomers who had never come into contact with alchemy. The more experienced they were, the more they would have their own deep-rooted beliefs. It wasn't something that could be changed easily. 20 origin chi pills were fresh out of the furnace. Guan Weiwu looked at the hazy pill halo in his hand and sighed again and again. "So it's like this, disciple. You're really a genius." Master pondered for a lifetime and couldn't figure it out, but, AI. Master will help you ask the sect for credit. Don't, Master, please don't do this again. Actually, without Master's strong support, I wouldn't have been able to comprehend the refining method with peace of mind. This credit should be Master's. Yu Qianqiu said sincerely. In his heart, he thought, I'll only be at ease if you accept the benefits. Unexpectedly, Guan Weiwu shook his head and smiled bitterly. What kind of person do you think Master is? In the end, Yu Qianqiu rejected it a few times, but it still didn't work. When it came to respecting intellectual property rights, the old man was fair and just, leaving people speechless. It was easy to imagine what happened next. Sect Master Feng Xiangtian arrived with a group of elders. After confirming the truth, Yu Qianchou almost couldn't raise his head due to the praise. Feng Xiangtian was so happy that he immediately ordered people to give Yu Qianchou 10,000 upper-grade spirit stones. This really shocked the surrounding people. All the elders looked at this millionaire with a strange expression. This was not a small amount of money, but it was indeed worth it compared to his contribution. The sect leader happily led the group of people away. Guan Weiwu pulled Yu Qianchou to the side and quietly explained some things to him. The latter was pleasantly surprised and nodded repeatedly to thank his master, while the former began to arrange the refining plan of the essence chi pill in the alchemy pavilion. Yu Qianchou never got involved in this kind of thing. He left the alchemy pavilion and went directly to Penglai Pavilion. When he arrived at the miscellaneous hall's chore office and asked to participate in the Pavilion of Cultivations competition, the disciples in the chore office looked at each other in dismay. They didn't expect a disciple of the alchemy pavilion to participate in this competition. According to the rules, they had to accept it, but when they checked Yu Qianchou's cultivation, they found that it was still early-stage foundation establishment. Thus, they told him that he had to go to the Pavilion of Cultivation to prove his cultivation as early-stage core formation before he was qualified to participate in this competition. Yu Qianchou immediately went to the Pavilion of Cultivation and found that he couldn't prove his cultivation beyond his cultivation level. As a result, he went from mid-stage foundation establishment to late-stage foundation establishment to early-stage core formation in one go, causing the elders who helped him to be a bit confused. He didn't care about this and went to the Penglai Pavilion's chore office again. He finally successfully signed up to participate in the Pavilion of Cultivations competition. Just as he was about to leave the chore office, he ran into someone he really didn't want to see. Someone who looked at him with hostility every time they met. Yu Qianchou bowed and said, "Elder Yan." With that, he was about to leave. "Yu Qianchou, take care," the chore office's head Elder Yan Ta said coldly. Yu Qianchou stopped, turned around, and said respectfully, "Elder Yan, what's the matter?" Yan Ta said in a deep voice, "Why do you hide when you see me? Did you do something shameful?" Elder Yan must be joking. Disciple wouldn't dare. "I have something to ask you. Do you dare to answer me honestly?" Disciple will definitely tell you everything I know. Actually, Yu Qianchou wasn't afraid of him, but he really didn't want to provoke him. After staying on supporting Immortal Island for so many years, Yu Qianchou more or less knew some things. Although supporting Immortal Island was known as the #1 sect in the cultivation world, it wasn't a monolithic entity. It was actually controlled by a few internal forces. These forces had always been competing in the dark, and they all wanted to take control of supporting Immortal Island. Starting from Ma Zhougu's generation, the Guan family produced many talented people, and that generation started to take control of supporting Immortal Island. When it came to Guan Dinghai's generation, because of his daughter's matter, Guan Dinghai was pushed down from the position of sect master by the opposition. However, the Guan family didn't want to hand over the power to the opposition. Normally, the position would be passed to the next generation, Guan Weiwu. However, Guan Weiwu was too disappointing and couldn't take up such a big responsibility. In the end, the Guan family pushed Guan Dinghai's eldest personal disciple, Feng Xiangtian, to the position of sect master. It should be said that the power of supporting Immortal Island still belonged to the Guan family. As for Yu Qianchou, as Guan Weiwu's personal disciple, he was also a member of the Guan family. In the past, Yu Qianchou didn't know about it, so he always went against Yan Shu. Now that he knew and understood that Yan Shu happened to be a member of the opposition, he couldn't help but feel that it was a close call. If he wasn't careful, he would be involved in the competition between the major forces. That wasn't a joke. Any one of them could be stronger than a sect like Ongquangsang. He really couldn't afford to offend them. Yan Tuo stroked his beard and said in a deep voice, "I heard something recently. I heard that during the Demon Ghost Region's trial, when the ghost general killed the disciples of various sects in a big tent, you were also in that big tent. Is that true? Yes. I also heard that you have a good relationship with the ghost general and saved many people. Why didn't you save the people in the big tent as well? When Yen Tuo said this, his tone revealed a bit of fierceness. Obviously, he was still brooding over his son's death. Damn it. Your son wanted to kill me that time, but he was already killed by me in advance. You still want me to save him? Old bastard, is there something wrong with your head? Yu Qianqiu sighed and said, Elder Yen, you may not know this, but at that time, the ghost general ordered us to meet him within an hour. A group of disciples with weaker cultivation really had nowhere to hide, so we could only do as he said. As a result, some disciples disobeyed the ghost general's order, which made the ghost general furious. At that time, I begged him bitterly, but the ghost general never showed mercy to those who dared to disobey him, so... Sigh. Yen Tuo's face twitched for a while before he asked again, with the ghost general's strength, killing them is naturally a piece of cake. Why did he have to capture them in the tent before killing them? Old bastard, I asked the ghost general to do this in order to kill your son. How dare you be so fierce to me, you see how I'll deal with you. Yu Qianqiu paused and said, Elder Yen, I won't hide it from you. Actually, I've been suspecting something. Don't talk in riddles with me. Yen Tuo snorted coldly. Yu Qianqiu nodded and said with a troubled expression, I accidentally heard something at that time, and I don't know if I heard it wrong. I didn't dare to say it because it's not a small matter after all. Actually, I suspect that those people are not dead. Yen Tuo's body trembled, and he grabbed Yu Qianqiu's shoulder and said while gasping for breath, What did you say? What did you hear at that time? Why do you suspect that those people are not dead? Chapter 150. Sigh. Old fart, it's easy if you're anxious, but I'm afraid you're not. Yu Qianqiu looked at the hand on his shoulder and told him seriously, Elder Yen, you're hurting me. Ah. Yen Tuo reacted and immediately let go of his hand. He squeezed out an ugly smile and said, Tell me your suspicions. Yes. Since Elder Yen has asked, I will naturally tell you the truth. Yu Qianqiu lowered his head and pondered for a while. He then raised his head and said, Elder Yen, you might not know, but Ghost General has a concubine named Yu Ji. My suspicions are related to her. At that time, when I begged the Ghost General to let those disciples go, I ended up angering the Ghost General and he chased me out. Before I came out, I seem to have heard that Yu Ji begging the Ghost General not to kill those people. Yen Tuo's eyes widened. Didn't you say that you saw Ghost General kill those disciples with your own eyes? Who said that? I've never said that I saw the Ghost General kill them with my own eyes. I don't dare to say things that I don't have proof. You must know that when Ghost General broke camp, I didn't even see the bodies of those disciples. All the disciples who were there saw it. Yu Qianqiu looked very innocent. Yen Tuo swallowed hard and said with an agitated expression, Then do you remember what Yu Ji said at that time? Elder Yen, don't rush me. It's been so long. Let me think about it. Yu Qianqiu frowned. Yen Tuo quickly nodded and said, Think about it. Think about it slowly. I won't rush you once you've thought it through. Yu Qianqiu made a few gestures as if he was thinking about it carefully. Yen Tuo waited at the side with a bitter smile, which almost made the former want to laugh. After a long time, he slowly nodded and said, General, I think Yu Ji's original words were like this, General, I've seen those servants who serve me in Chilly Wind Valley for thousands of years and I'm really tired of them. Why don't you let them go and send them to Chilly Wind Valley to be servants? What do you think? Yu Qianqiu imitated Yu Ji's speech vividly and came back to his senses. He said seriously, If I remember correctly, that should be what she said. Then do you remember if Ghost General promised her or not? Yen Tuo asked excitedly. Yu Qianzhou frowned and said thoughtfully, because I had already walked out of the tent at that time, I seemed to vaguely hear Ghost General say, very good or something. But after thinking about it, I think I must have heard it wrong. Otherwise, after Ghost General let them go, how could we not even see their shadows? Alas! Elder Yen, just pretend that I didn't say what I said today. I'm just guessing about what happened that day. Let's take everyone's conclusion as the truth. I still have something to do and will leave first. Yen Tuo stood there in a daze. After a long time, he came back to his senses and found that Yu Qianzhou had already disappeared. He opened his mouth and froze in place. 2 days later, on the square in front of the main hall of Penglai Pavilion, a big wooden sign announced the list of the competition, which attracted many people to watch. There were nearly 300 disciples participating in the Nascent Soul stage competition and nearly 1,000 disciples participating in the Core Formation stage competition. Almost all of them were disciples of the Cultivation Pavilion. However, there was one exception. At the bottom was written, Alchemy Pavilion, Early Stage Core Formation, Yu Qianzhou. Set off by the more than 1,000 pavilion of cultivation disciples, it was exceptionally prominent. Perhaps someone was deliberately making fun of it, but the words at the very bottom were twice as large as the ones at the top. It was impossible for it not to stand out. This news immediately caused an uproar on Fuxian Island. First, no one expected the famous Yu Qianzhou to reach the core formation stage so quickly. Second, no one expected something that had not been seen for thousands of years to happen. There were actually disciples from other sects who wanted to compete with the Cultivation Pavilion. It was really exciting. In comparison, no one paid attention to how his cultivation level increased so quickly. Everyone was guessing how many rounds Yu Qianzhou could last. Due to the celebrity effect, the Alchemy Pavilion suddenly became the focal point of Fuxian Island. As long as someone met a disciple of the Alchemy Pavilion, they would stop them and ask them about Yu Qianzhou. The questions they asked were very strange. In short, most people felt that Yu Qianzhou was looking for a thrill. Yu Qianzhou's courtyard was also constantly visited by guests. The first to visit was Furong. After the two of them parted ways, Gu Qingyun came again. The moment he saw Yu Qianzhou, he asked in amazement, Tisk Tsk. Your actions are no different from challenging the Cultivation Pavilion. There are many core formation disciples in our Cultivation Pavilion who want to meet you in the first battle. They want to defeat you and make a name for themselves. By the way, when did you reach the core formation stage? How come I didn't know? It seems it is good to have a principal elder of the Alchemy Pavilion as a master. Elder Guan must have given you a lot of elixirs, right? Otherwise, how could your cultivation level increase so quickly? Do you have anything good for me? Yu Qianzhou directly coaxed this meddlesome woman who asked a lot of questions to leave. Not long after, Chen Gingqing heard the news and came again. After praising his courage, he shook his head and left with a sigh. Following that, Yang Qian also came. He said helplessly, "You really dared to do it." He walked around him a few times and also left. Soon after, Ko Shuahua and the other two women, as well as Xiao Wanqing from the safe pavilion, also came together. The four women were very confident in him. Xiao Wanqing even encouraged him and declared, "Tomorrow, the four of us will watch your battle together." Yu Qianzhou thanked the four women and saw them off. Just as he was about to take a breath, his master came again. Guan Weiwu stared at him from head to toe countless times and finally sighed, "Disciple, if possible, try to hold on for a few more matches. You have to know that if you lose the first match, it will not look good for our Alchemy Pavilion." I didn't think you would really be so impulsive. After he finished speaking, he scratched his dirty hair and left in confusion. He originally thought that those who should come were all here and that it should be about time. Who knew that there would be more people coming, and each of them was higher than the last. First, there was a person who surprised him. Yen Tuo actually came personally and encouraged him before leaving. Then, the head elder of Wanfan Garden, Fernan, also came. Elder Fernan was like a father-in-law looking at his son-in-law. He nodded with gratification and said, "Since you have signed up, don't think too much. When the time comes, go all out." So what if it is the cultivation pavilion? We are all at core formation stage. Why should we be afraid of them? Yu Qianqiu repeatedly said yes and sent him out. The person who came next shocked Yu Qianqiu. It was actually his master's father, the current Guan Dinghai, the previous head of Fuxian Island. Guan Dinghai stared at him deeply and asked, "Did you decide this yourself or your master? Or did someone else make you do this?" After Yu Qianqiu repeatedly stressed that it was his decision, Guan Dinghai nodded noncommittally and left. It was hard to tell if he was happy or unhappy. Yu Qianqiu heaved a sigh of relief. He thought about everyone and thought, Ma Jiugu will be next. Unfortunately, he guessed correctly. Ma Jiugu really came with Lan Bingxue. Ma Jiugu revealed a rare smile and said, "I was right about you. A man shouldn't be so timid." Sigh. It's so good to be young. Before leaving, she added, "There is something you don't know. Not long after you left the mulberry garden, that girl Yen Zixia went back. As for where she went, I think you should know, right?" With that said, she trembled and walked away. Lan Bingxue looked at him with a complicated gaze. Not far from the courtyard, there were two nascent soul disciples chatting. When they saw the people coming and going, they couldn't help but notice them. When they saw that the people coming were all of higher ranks than the other, they were speechless. They looked at each other and quickly left. They were afraid that they would see something the higher-ups didn't want them to see. Yu Qianqiu stood at the entrance of the courtyard and took a deep breath. He really didn't think that participating in a competition would cause such a big commotion. After confirming that no one else would come, he decided to take a good rest. No matter what, he had to rest for tomorrow's competition. In fact, he was worried that the sect head would also come. Chapter 151. The competition was held in the large square in front of the main hall of the cultivation pavilion. There were people everywhere, on the ground, on the trees, on the roofs. Sect head Feng Xiangtian and the other elders stood on the top floor of the cultivation pavilion. They looked around and were secretly shocked. Why did so many disciples come to watch? There had been no lack of similar competitions in the past, but it was definitely not as influential as this one. It actually completely surrounded the surroundings. What they didn't know was that other than the disciples from the cultivation pavilion, almost all the disciples from the other factions who had nothing to do had come. Those who had something to do had already finished what they were doing. All of them wanted to see Yu Qianqiu from the alchemy pavilion. It wasn't because Yu Qianqiu had a lot of influence on them, but because Yu Qianqiu's actions were what the other factions wanted to do but didn't dare to do. It was their dream. They were hoping that Yu Qianqiu would be able to break the undefeated legend of the cultivation pavilion on supporting Immortal Island and help them, who were inferior to him, vent their anger. That was all. Many disciples from the other factions who hadn't reached Foundation establishment sighed. They were depressed that they couldn't come out and watch the competition. Around the square, the disciples from the other factions stood together with the people from the cultivation pavilion. The alchemy pavilion had already become the focus of the audience. Even before it appeared, its limelight had already overshadowed the pavilion of cultivation. Who knew how many people were pointing and whispering? The pavilion of cultivation, on the other hand, had become a foil. This made the disciples of the pavilion of cultivation very unhappy. This time, the alchemy pavilion came out in full force. Other than a few disciples who hadn't reached Foundation establishment, everyone else came to support Yu Qianqiu. Even Guan Weiwu stood on the platform of the cultivation pavilion. A few elders walked out of the cultivation pavilion's main hall, led by Dongfang Chonggao. Behind them, a few disciples carried out a few large boxes and lined them up in front of the cultivation pavilion's main hall. The elders each walked in front of a large box. Dongfang Chonggao's voice echoed throughout the square. There are a total of 987 disciples participating in the core formation competition. For fairness, we have decided to draw lots. There are 2 sets of wooden lots numbered from 1 to 493 in these 4 boxes. Those who draw the same number will compete against each other. Because there is only one person, there is a white lot in each box. The disciple who draws the white lot will advance to the second round of the competition. Now, all participating disciples, come and draw lots. Young Qian turned around to look at Yu Qian, who was beside him, and said with a bitter smile, "The 987th place will be decided by drawing lots. You'll have to win at least 7 matches in a row to get into the top 10. You'd better be prepared." Yu Qiancho smiled indifferently and walked towards the lottery box in the main hall. The moment he walked out, he attracted the attention of tens of thousands of disciples. Almost everyone's head turned towards the direction of the alchemy pavilion. Feng Xiangtian and the others, who were standing on top of the cultivation pavilion, could clearly see the changes in their surroundings. The white faces on both sides of their heads turned to the back of their heads. It was a spectacular sight. Many elders laughed. Elder Mo of the alchemy pavilion said eccentrically, "Old Guan, this disciple of yours is interesting." Guan Weiwu turned his head and stared at him. "What? You're not convinced? If you have the ability, your alchemy pavilion can also pull out a disciple like this." Elder Mo chuckled. "I know myself. Since I know it will be embarrassing to pull him out, it's better if I don't pull him out. The 2 of you are bickering. Can't you see that there are tens of thousands of disciples below?" Sect Master Feng Xiangtian snorted coldly without turning his head back. The 2 principal elders immediately stared at each other without saying a word. Actually, Yu Qiancho still wanted to keep a low profile. However, all the other disciples had come out from the cultivation pavilion. He was the only one who walked out from the alchemy pavilion. It was impossible for him not to attract attention. Yu Qiancho looked around. There were bright eyes staring at him everywhere. It was as if he had become a rare animal in the zoo. Damn it. Look, look. I won't collect money. Yu Qiancho muttered to himself as he slowly walked over. There were nearly 1,000 people waiting to draw lots anyway. There was no hurry. Needless to say, his calm and unhurried demeanor made many people admire him. There were many people, so the people who had drawn lots consciously stood on both sides. Seeing that the lots were almost drawn, Yu Qiancho found a box with fewer people and stood in line. He slowly approached the box. When it was his turn, he realized that the elder who was holding the box with one hand had used his divine sense to protect the box. Obviously, he was afraid that someone would insert their divine sense into the box to cheat. Yu Qiancho didn't think about cheating. To him, it was the same no matter who he fought. He reached into the box and found that it was almost empty. His fingers touched one and he grabbed it. After taking it out, he didn't look at it and stood to the side obediently. However, he found that the surrounding disciples were looking at him as if they were demons looking at Tang Seng's flesh. Not long after, the lots were drawn. Dongfang Chonggao glanced at the crowd and said in a deep voice, "Those who have drawn the white lot, hand over your white lot and wait for the next round of drawing lots." Everyone looked at the lot in their hands and then looked at each other. Yu Qiancho didn't know the people around him, so he stood there obediently. He didn't believe that his luck was so good that he could draw the white lot from nearly 1,000 people. After a while, no one stood out among the disciples. Everyone looked at each other and didn't understand what was going on. Feng Xiangtian's face instantly darkened. He stared at Dongfang Chang Ao and shouted, Chang Ao, what's going on? Dongfang Chang Ao bowed to the people upstairs, then turned around and said sternly, look at the lots in your hands again. Look carefully. Yu Qianqiu suddenly felt a little bad. Was his luck really so good? How did he get a free lot just like that? He opened the lot in his hand and looked at it from the front to the back. Suddenly, a layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. Both sides of this thin piece of wood were smooth. It was difficult to find even the slightest flaw, let alone find the words. It was a good thing to draw the white lot, but it was a little hot in his hand. Wasn't it asking for his life? The joke was a little too much. Did everyone look at the lot in your hand clearly? The disciples who drew the white lot stand out. Dongfang Chang Ao was very depressed. Such a small thing actually caused the sect leader to scold him in front of everyone. Elder Dongfang, is the lot without words called the white lot? Someone in the crowd raised a hand and asked weakly. Dongfang Chang Ao said snappily, yes. Yu Qianqiu quickly flashed out of the crowd and ran to Dongfang Chang Ao with a white lot in his hand. He handed it over with both hands and said in fear and trepidation, this disciple really didn't know that the lot without words was a white lot. Elder, please punish me. Everyone almost fainted. The surroundings suddenly became lively and there was endless laughter. Dongfang Chang Ao's face was so gloomy that water could be wrung out. Feng Xiangtian, who was upstairs, saw that the disciple was actually Yu Qianqiu. His mouth opened but he didn't say anything. Guan Weiwu and Ferdinand were dumbfounded. Elder Mo of the equipment refining pavilion lowered his head and hit his head on the railing. He laughed so hard that he couldn't stand straight. After a while, he gasped and said, Old Guan, this disciple of yours is too good at torturing people. When has Dongfang Chang Ao been played like this before? Being in the limelight like this will kill people, ah. Chapter 152. Dongfang Chang Ao naturally knew who Yu Qianqiu was. He turned around and looked at the sect leader. Feng Xiangtian shouted, Yu Qianqiu, do you know where you are? Is this a place where you can mess around? Since you didn't know anything, I'll forgive you for now. If you do it again, I won't let you off lightly. Yu Qianqiu bowed in gratitude. Chang Ao, let's continue. Dongfang Chang Ao nodded and turned around to look at Yu Qianqiu. He looked around and shouted, Alchemy Pavilion's Yu Qianqiu has drawn the white lot and will advance to the next round of the competition unconditionally. Those who have drawn lots 1 to 10, stay here. The rest of the disciples can leave for now. Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu let out a sigh of relief. As if he had been granted amnesty, he jogged back to the Alchemy Pavilion. Seeing him like this, many people laughed to death. Among the Cultivation Pavilion's crowd, Gu Qingyun shook his head helplessly, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Xiao Wanqing, who was mixed in the crowd of Wanfan Garden, fell powerlessly on Ko Shuohua's shoulder. She couldn't stop giggling. The other girls also couldn't help but smile. Unfortunately, Furong didn't like crowded places and didn't come this time. Otherwise, who knew what she would think if she saw this? You, sigh. I really don't know what to say to you. Young Qian smiled bitterly as he looked at Yu Qianqiu who had run back to his side. Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands at the Alchemy Pavilion disciples and said, I really didn't do it on purpose. I've made a fool of myself in front of everyone. I'm really sorry. Everyone revealed a smile of support. After the spectators laughed, they were greatly disappointed. They had come here mainly for Yu Qianqiu. Who would have thought that he would run into him when there was a 1 in 1,000 chance? Who could they go to talk to about this? The plaza was large enough, and it was divided into 10 areas, each supervised by 10 elders. This time, the competition between the 10 pairs of disciples began. The joke just now was also temporarily thrown aside by the crowd, and their attention shifted to the competition. The sword transformed into a stream of light, crisscrossing in all directions. Silhouettes flashed and shouted. For a moment, the entire square was filled with the sound of metal clashing, and there were even sounds of collisions. After the competition, most of the 10 disciples who lost were injured. Some were even carried away with serious injuries. Those who were on good terms with Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but worry for him. Death and injury were allowed in this competition. Naturally, the goal was to allow the participants to display their full strength. Looking at the competition just now, many people had shown mercy. Perhaps it was because they were disciples of the same faction, so it was not good for them to kill. Otherwise, they would not be able to explain themselves when they returned. But for Yu Qianqiu, it would not be so good. Most of the disciples who signed up for the competition were late core formation stage disciples. At the same time, they were also the elites of the cultivation pavilion. Think about it, if there was a large difference in cultivation, they would have already suffered a great loss. Although they were all core formation cultivators, Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was 2 whole layers lower than theirs. If his opponent didn't show mercy, then Yu Qianqiu's situation would be obvious. Yu Qianqiu had also discovered that the closer the cultivation of the 2 disciples, the more dangerous the battle would be. Everyone wanted to win and would often attack with the intention of killing the other. As a result, once the victor was decided, one side would either die or be seriously injured. It was not like when there was a large difference in cultivation. Those with higher cultivation could easily win, so they could control their strength. If the competition continued like this, then a few people would definitely die. Sure enough, in the second round, a disciple's head was cut off by his opponent. The smell of blood spread and seemed to have stimulated the competing disciples. The fighting became more and more intense and both sides often attacked each other to kill. Young Qian looked worriedly at Yu Qianqiu. He saw that Yu Qianqiu's eyes were slightly narrowed. Feng Xiangtian, who was in the cultivation pavilion, frowned. Guan Weiwu called him over and said, "Weiwu, although Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was forcibly raised to the core formation stage by you, there is still a gap between him and the other disciples. His talent in alchemy is really rare. If something happens to him, it will be a great loss to supporting Immortal Island. What I mean is, should you let him think about it? If it really doesn't work, let him go up and admit defeat. Didn't he draw a blank this round? It's not too late to let him withdraw from the competition now." The elders on the side thought about it and felt that sect leader was right. Yu Qianqiu's alchemy was a secret to others, but most of the people upstairs had seen Yu Qianqiu's alchemy with their own eyes. His talent was really great. If anything happened to him, it would be a great loss for supporting Immortal Island. They couldn't help but nod in agreement with sect leader's opinion. Guan Weiwu was taken aback. "Senior brother, wouldn't my alchemy pavilion lose face?" "Sect leader, I don't think it's necessary." Ferdinand walked over and said with a frown, "What's the use of refining elixirs no matter how good he is? If he runs away from a competition with his fellow disciples, I'm afraid he won't be able to raise his head in supporting Immortal Island for the rest of his life. Unless he leaves supporting Immortal Island in the future." In Ferdinand's mind, he didn't want his daughter to follow a waste. "Yes. Yes." Guan Weiwu echoed. Feng Xiangtian nodded slightly and turned his attention back to the competition. The elders didn't say anything. Nearly 1,000 people fought nearly 50 matches. A day passed just like that. In the end, most of the people who lost were injured. More than 10 disciples even lost their lives. Yu Qianqiu sat cross-legged on the ground and watched the competition from beginning to end without saying a word. Every time he saw those who killed their opponents, his eyes would unconsciously narrow and remember that person's face. There was no competition that night because it was held during the day. After the competition ended, the disciples of each faction quickly rushed back. If there was anything, they had to quickly finish it tonight. Yu Qianqiu couldn't run away from tomorrow's competition. Because there were 493 disciples who won today and Yu Qianqiu who had advanced in advance, it was just an even number and could be divided into 247 matches. So, it meant that there wouldn't be a situation where there would be a blank lot tomorrow. Tomorrow was really a good day that everyone was looking forward to. The next day, the crowd didn't decrease at all. Their gazes were still focused on Yu Qianqiu who was drawing the lot. Yu Qianqiu touched the lot and held it firmly in his palm after taking a glance. A smile appeared on his lips. His luck wasn't bad. It was a round number. The number was 20. However, he didn't know who his opponent was. When he returned to the Elixir Refinery Pavilion, young Qian asked even though he already knew the answer, "Are you done?" Yu Qianqiu nodded. Seeing the worry in his eyes, he couldn't help but smile. Was there really so much to worry about? When he had been cultivating in Utopia, he had often gotten the 3 company commanders in the late-stage nascent soul realm to spar with him. That was not child's play. He was playing with real skills. Why would he be afraid of these disciples in the late-stage core formation realm? Yu Qianqiu calmly watched the competition in front of him. When he realized that his disciple, who had already killed someone yesterday, had actually killed another opponent today, Yu Qianqiu's eyes narrowed into slits, and a cold gleam flashed in them. The surrounding people watched the matches one after another, but they still didn't see Yu Qianqiu go up. They were all a little anxious, but they didn't know what number he had drawn. When Dongfang Chang'ao announced the start of the 20th match of the day, Yu Qianqiu stood up and slowly walked towards the center of the stage. Young Qian, who was standing to the side, let out a soft, "ah" sound. Immediately, like a stone being tossed into 1,000 ripples, everyone's heads turned around, their gazes all focused on the figure that was slowly walking towards the center of the stage. Chapter 153. The whole place was in an uproar. People were pointing at Yu Qianqiu, who was walking out. The sect leader and others in the attic were a little surprised. Looking at the disciples, they did not expect Yu Qianqiu to have such a great influence. Gu Qingyun was a little excited. Ever since the trial in the Demon Ghost region, Yu Qianqiu seemed to have become a legend that wasn't a legend. Although the two of them were on good terms, Yu Qianqiu still suppressed Gu Qingyun to the point that he couldn't breathe. Ko Shuihua and the other girls were also a little excited. So far, those who knew Yu Qianqiu in Fuxian Island had not seen him fight seriously. Their anticipation could be imagined. The 20 disciples gave the lots to Dongfang Chang'ao. The attention of these disciples was also focused on Yu Qianqiu. Their eyes were fixed on the lot in his hand. It seemed that they were all looking forward to fighting with him. The 10 elders reported the number they needed to supervise, and the disciples followed them to the competition ground. When there was only Yu Qianqiu and another person left in front of the hall, the two of them turned their heads and looked at each other. Needless to say, you and I are opponents. The person who supervised the competition was Elder Sun, who went to the Demon Ghost region last time. He glanced at the two of them and said loudly, "The one who drew number 200, follow me." After that, he walked to the last competition ground, and the two of them followed him. I say, this guy should work hard. Guan Weiwu rubbed his palms excitedly and anxiously. There were traces of water on the railing that he had just grabbed. Obviously, his palms were sweaty. Ferdinand, who was standing on the side, glanced at him and said with a smile, "Don't worry. I have paid attention to his opponent. He is not the kind of person who is cruel and merciless. Even if he can't win, it should not be a big deal." Because Yu Qianqiu often went to Wanfen Garden, many disciples of Wanfen Garden knew him. At this time, seeing him standing in the competition ground, they all talked about whether he could win or not. Xiao Wanqing and the other girls turned around and told them with certainty, Yu Qianqiu will definitely be able to do it. The girls' blind worship didn't diminish at all. Ko Xiuhua, on the other hand, was much more rational. After hearing their words, she shook her head slightly. Begin. Dongfang Chang Ao's voice rang out. The onlookers immediately fell silent. The sounds of fighting immediately rang out. However, this was not what everyone was concerned about. Everyone's attention was on the two people on the 10th stage. However, the two people in the field did not make a move for a long time. The two of them sized each other up for a while and suddenly laughed, causing the surrounding people to feel a little puzzled. Yu Qianqiu's opponent cupped his fists and said with a smile, "I'm Lu Guang, a late-stage core formation cultivator. You must be the legendary Yu Qianqiu who roamed the demon and ghost domain. I've heard so much about you. I didn't think that I would be the first to fight against you. It's an honor. So it's Senior Martial Brother Lu. I've seen Senior Martial Brother fight yesterday. I hope Senior Martial Brother will go easy on me like yesterday." Yu Qianqiu smiled and returned the greeting. He had an impression of this person. He was the only person who didn't injure his opponent in the slightest yesterday. Other than showing that he had a good heart, it could also be seen that his cultivation level was also not bad from the way he attacked. "Are the two of you here to chat or to fight?" Elder Son, who was in charge of supervising the competition, was a little unhappy. The two of them first stood there for a while, then looked at each other, smiled, and chatted for a while. There were already a few battles in the other fields that had been decided, but the two of them still hadn't made a move. "Please." Lu Guang gestured for his opponent to make the first move. In his mind, there was a gap of 2 levels between their cultivation levels. This was a battle without any suspense. Even if he won, it would be a little unfair. Yu Qianqiu smiled and nodded. His entire aura suddenly changed. Although there was still a smile on his face, it was as if the person standing there wasn't a human, but an immovable mountain, indifferently looking down at the opponent in front of him. Lu Guang suddenly felt suffocated by the aura. He was shocked and the long sword on his back shot out with a clang. He circled around his body and carefully guarded himself. Elder Son's pupils also suddenly widened as he stared at Yu Qianqiu in surprise. The disciples who were watching the competition also noticed the strangeness here. Feng Xiangtian, who was on the pavilion, suddenly had a flash of light in his eyes. He stared at this place and slowly stroked his long beard. The group of elders also slightly squinted their eyes. At this moment, the other battles had already ended, but they still hadn't made a move. "Senior Brother Lu, be careful. The move I'm going to use is called One Sword of No Regrets. Please give me some pointers, Senior Brother Lu." Yu Qianqiu said indifferently, giving Lu Guang a great deal of pressure. He also didn't know why it was like this. His opponent's cultivation was obviously 2 levels lower than his, but he didn't know what he was afraid of. All of a sudden, everyone who was staring at the square seemed to see a flash of light. Before they could figure out what was going on, they saw a bright flying sword pointed straight at Lu Guang's throat. While everyone was silent and shocked, they heard the "ing-ing" sound that could only be heard when a long sword was quickly unsheathed spread throughout the square. Everyone then reacted and was shocked. What a fast speed! The sword was already on his opponent's neck, and they only heard the sound of the sword being unsheathed. Oh my God! How fast was this speed? It was too terrifying. Without a doubt, it had already surpassed the speed of sound transmission. Elder Son was the closest person to the two competitors. With his cultivation, he could clearly see the sword's trajectory, but the speed of the sword was too shocking. Sect Master Feng Xiangtian's hand that was stroking his beard paused, and the group of elders were all stunned. Guan Weiwu's mouth was wide open, and his face was full of disbelief. Feeling the sharpness on his neck, Lu Guang smiled bitterly with a pale face. "I've lost." The long sword that was circling around his body slowly returned to its scabbard. Was there still a need to compete? Lu Guang had already shown mercy, or else his head would have been separated from his neck. But this speed was too fast, so fast that he didn't even have the chance to react. Yu Qianqiu withdrew his aura, and his long sword flashed back into its scabbard. He turned to leave. Lu Guang suddenly shouted, "Junior brother Yu, please wait." "What's the matter, senior brother Lu?" Yu Qianqiu turned around and asked. "Junior brother Xiaoyu, please show mercy." Lu Guang dejectedly bowed and asked for guidance. "Just now, I heard junior brother Yu say that this move is called one sword without regrets. I felt that it was strange. I've never seen this sword technique in the Sutra Pavilion before. Junior brother Yu, please teach me so that I can understand why I lost." Yu Qianqiu calmly smiled and said, "This sword technique was created when I was reading the Sutra Pavilion sword techniques. Senior brother Lu, there's no need to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank yourself. If it wasn't for senior brother Lu having the heart of a Buddha at the center of the competition yesterday, my sword should have no regrets. But in the end, I still regretted it and didn't dare to hurt senior brother Lu." Finished speaking, he turned around and walked towards the people from the alchemy pavilion. Lu Guang was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. It seemed that Lu Guang let him go because he didn't hurt anyone yesterday. Otherwise, that sword really would have taken his life. Thinking about it, he felt lucky for his momentary kindness yesterday. At this moment, the people from the cultivation pavilion were silent. The core formation stage disciples were all thinking about whether they could have dodged that sword if they were in Lu Guang's shoes. The other factions were boiling with excitement, as if they had won. Yu Qianqiu's sword had won beautifully. With just one sword, he had defeated the cultivation pavilion's disciple. Finally, they, the inferior disciples who did odd jobs, could vent their anger. Chapter 154. The outcome of the battle was naturally too surprising for everyone. Guan Weiwu scratched his head and laughed. "Not bad, you brat. You didn't waste my effort." Ferdinand's face twitched. He turned his head and sneered, "How dare you say that? What effort did you waste? What did you teach this disciple?" Guan Weiwu rolled his eyes and snorted, "This is between us, master and disciple. Why should I tell you?" Ferdinand sneered disdainfully and turned his head to ignore Guan Weiwu. Feng Xiangtian asked the person next to him, "What sword skill in the Sutra Depository is good at speed? Why haven't I heard of it? Is this boy really so talented that he can actually comprehend some sword skill?" With their cultivation, they naturally heard the conversation between Yu Qianqiu and Lu Guang. The person next to him had white hair and beard, a calm temperament, and a dignified aura. It was the cultivation pavilion's principal elder, O Sihai. He said calmly, "I have never seen any sword skill in the Sutra Depository that is good at speed. Even if he really comprehended it, so what? Speed? Humph. It's just an unorthodox skill. It's vulnerable in the face of absolute strength. The disciple who was defeated just now was just careless." Feng Xiangtian raised his eyebrows and did not say anything. He looked at the competition venue again. This round had only finished 20 matches. There were still nearly 5 matches left. The next matches had already begun. Most people were still immersed in Yu Qianqiu's match just now. They were obviously a little absent-minded in the following matches. The disciples of the alchemy pavilion were even less in the mood to watch. When they saw Yu Qianqiu walking back, they were all in high spirits and happily accepted the envious eyes of the other disciples. After he sat down cross-legged, young Qian smiled and said, "What else do you have that we don't know? It turns out that you already have a card up your sleeve. We were worried for nothing." Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, "I was just lucky. My opponent's cultivation is higher than mine. My speed can only be used when he is unprepared. Now that I'm exposed, I'm afraid the next match won't be so easy." Yang Qian thought for a while and nodded slightly. "I told you that Yu Qianqiu would be able to do it. Do you see now? I was right." Xiao Wanqing and the others were chatting with a group of female disciples in the Myriad Fragrance Garden. Ko Xiuhua shook her head. With Yu Qianqiu like this, the girls were afraid. The matches were over very quickly. Another dozen people lost their lives. Yu Qianqiu watched each match seriously and found that the ones who killed their fellow disciples were always the same dozen people. They never showed mercy when they attacked. They were all ruthless characters. The second round of matches ended and 247 people were decided. The third round of drawing lots began. This time, there was also a white lot. Yu Qianqiu had learned his lesson and immediately looked at the lot he drew. It was number 36, which was the third match of the third round. It seemed that good luck would not always be on his side. This kind of fight between cultivators would not last too long. Usually, the winner would be decided in less than 10 minutes. Because the arena was divided, the range of movement was restricted. Those who were strong had to win as soon as possible so that they would not be given too much time. Otherwise, how long would it take to fight nearly 1,000 matches from start to finish? Of course, the disciples who were good at fighting were at a disadvantage, but it was a test of their overall strength. After the two matches were over, Dongfang Chang Ao announced the preparation for the third match. Yu Qianqiu immediately stood up and handed in the wooden lot. When he arrived at arena number 6, he saw that his opponent was one of the dozen people who were easy to kill. After 2 matches, he had killed 2 people in a row. Yu Qianqiu could not help but squint his eyes. Many people also noticed the situation, and many of them were worried for Yu Qianqiu. As soon as Dongfang Chang Ao announced the start of the match, Yu Qianqiu wanted to bow and ask for his opponent's name. Just as he cupped his fists, his opponent's long sword quickly shot out and slashed at his head. There was no room for negotiation. Yu Qianqiu was taken aback. Fortunately, his flying speed was extremely fast. In an instant, a sword light flashed behind him and directly blocked the flying sword. The flying sword was originally connected to the mind. Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was 2 levels lower than his opponent's. In addition, it happened suddenly and his mind was unstable. How could he resist the opponent's premeditated attack? He only felt that the heavy blow from the sword shook his mind. His chest was stuffy, his throat was sweet, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. The sudden change surprised everyone. They did not expect that the Cultivation Pavilion's disciple, who was 2 levels higher than his opponent, would still use a sneak attack. Guan Weiwu, who was on the attic, saw this and was about to fly out to save his disciple, but he was grabbed by Ferdinand who was next to him. Yu Qianqiu was in a trance. His mind had already lost contact with the flying sword, and the flying sword fell to the ground with a clang. The man smiled sinisterly. After shaking off the opponent's sword, he flipped the sword in the air and shot it straight at Yu Qianqiu. At the moment when the connection between the sword and the mind was broken, Yu Qianqiu suddenly woke up. He suddenly felt something was wrong, and his figure quickly dodged. He saw a stream of light rushing into the place where he was just standing. There was a loud bang on the bluestone floor. Stone chips flew everywhere, and a hole was directly blasted on the ground. Yu Qianqiu's figure dodged and stabilized his mind. When his divine sense had just reconnected with the flying sword on the ground, he saw the opponent's figure flashed and stepped on the flying sword on the ground. Yu Qianqiu immediately felt that the connection between his mind and the flying sword was broken again. A cold light flashed again from the hole in the ground and whistled straight over. Yu Qianqiu flipped backwards, and the cold light brushed past his body. However, before he could stabilize his body, he heard a whistling sound behind him. He immediately rolled to the side, and another hole exploded on the ground. The spectators were shocked to the core. Since the start of the competition, this was the first time they had seen someone knock away a flying sword in a single exchange. Thinking about it, it must have something to do with the difference in cultivation between Yu Qianqiu and his opponent. Xiao Wanqing and the other girls were also frightened by the scene in front of them. The scene of Yu Qianqiu controlling 3 swords at the same time in the demon ghost region flashed through Koxiuhua's mind. Her gaze fell on the flying sword that was stepped on, and her tightly furrowed eyebrows relaxed. She didn't know why, but after the attacking flying sword came out from the ground, it floated in the air and didn't attack again. The Cultivation Pavilion's disciple revealed an expression of a cat playing with a mouse. He jokingly said, "You are that Yu Qianqiu, right? You're only at the early stage of core formation, yet you dare to come here to join in the fun. You really don't know what's good for you. If you kneel down and admit defeat now, I can consider sparing your life. Otherwise, you can wait for the Alchemy Pavilion to collect your corpse." With that said, the flying sword threateningly pointed at Yu Qianqiu in the air and circled twice. Guan Weiwu, who was on the pavilion, was so angry that he couldn't speak. He rolled up his sleeves and looked like he was going to fight desperately, but he was hugged tightly by Fernan. Yu Qianqiu stood up and spat out a mouthful of bloody saliva. Then, he suddenly burst into wild laughter. Contrasting with the bloodstains on his face and clothes, he looked somewhat ferocious as he roared, "Bullshit. I was considering whether or not to give the Cultivation Pavilion some face. Now that the Emperor is here, don't expect me to let you go. You arrogant dog." His voice spread out in all directions. Everyone heard what he said clearly, and they were all stunned. None of them expected Yu Qianqiu to curse in front of so many people. It was truly a disgrace to him. The Cultivation Pavilion's disciple was stunned. He shouted with a livid face, "You're courting death. Courting your mother." Yu Qianqiu immediately shouted back. He made a hand sign and dozens of cold lights flashed out of his storage bag. One of the cold lights turned into a sword and carried him into the air. The other 50 cold lights turned into a sword umbrella and protected his back. Under the bright sun in the sky, the sword umbrella emitted a dazzling golden light. The people around almost couldn't see Yu Qianqiu clearly in the sword circle in the air. Chapter 155. What was going on? The people watching were all dumbfounded. They saw Yu Qianqiu floating majestically in the air like a god, and behind him was a shining golden wheel. Some disciples were positioned at the angle of refraction of the sunlight, and they couldn't open their eyes because of the dazzling light. Feng Xiangtian and the elders in the pavilion looked at each other. No one had seen this kind of sword technique before. Guan Weiwu rubbed his palms excitedly. The Cultivation Pavilion's disciples' expression changed. The flying sword sped up and shot toward Yu Qianqiu in the air. Yu Qianqiu coldly snorted and stretched out 2 fingers to point at the sword umbrella. 3 cold lights suddenly shot out from the sword umbrella behind him, clashing with the incoming flying swords. A series of clanking sounds rang out as the 4 flying swords fought in the air. As for the others, there were still a few disciples who had yet to decide a victor in their battles. They all stopped fighting and looked over at the battle over here. The commotion over here was too big. Yu Qianqiu released 3 flying swords. One of them entangled the opponent's flying sword, and they kept clashing head-on. Although his cultivation level was not as high as the opponent's, he was fast. When one sword was knocked away, the other one would follow up. Of the 3 flying swords, One was always facing off against the opponent's flying sword, while the other two would seize the opportunity to strike the opponent's sword with their sharp sword light. It was a bit like the three heroes versus Lu Bu. In short, the three flying swords trapped the sword, not giving it any chance to escape. This was because his cultivation level was not as high as the opponent's, so he could only win by outnumbering the opponent. In the beginning, Yu Qianqiu was worried that the opponent's cultivation level was too high, and he would be injured if the flying swords collided with it. After calming himself down a few times, he felt relieved. It was not because of the difference in cultivation level between the two, but because he was not prepared at the beginning and was successfully ambushed. When he was in Utopia, this situation did not happen when he was sparring with the three company commanders who were at the late nascent soul stage. It was purely because he was careless. However, this provided a very good way for him to fight in the future. Sneak attacks were definitely a good choice. Now that he had nothing to worry about, it was time to deal with this guy. Yu Qianqiu looked down and cackled, "You dog, see how I'll deal with you." He stretched out two fingers and pointed with the driving sword art. The sword umbrella behind him released two rays of cold light that flew towards the cultivation pavilion's disciple. After being tricked by him just now, Yu Qianqiu also had thoughts of revenge. The two beams of cold light did not kill the opponent very quickly, and the opponent always managed to dodge it. That person was rolling on the ground and jumping around. Just as his figure flashed, the flying sword pierced a hole in the ground. As for the sword that he stepped on just now, Yu Qianqiu kept it for his own use. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of explosions rang out one after another. There was not a single piece of limestone laid on the sixth stage that was left intact. There were potholes everywhere. That person was immediately forced into a difficult situation by the three flying swords. His initial arrogance and complacency had long since disappeared. Right now, he was desperately running for his life. In the eyes of the bystanders, he was even more frightened and in a precarious situation. He didn't know when he would be slaughtered. His appearance was indeed a bit shameful. "Dog, if you kneel down and admit defeat now, I can consider sparing your life. Otherwise, just wait for the cultivation pavilion to collect your corpse." "Kaka." Yu Qianqiu laughed arrogantly. He completely threw that person's words back at him. After a round of torture, that disciple did indeed have thoughts of admitting defeat. However, he couldn't kneel down and admit defeat even if he was beaten to death. If he really did that, he feared that the cultivation pavilion would no longer be able to tolerate him. At this moment, the people with the most complicated feelings were none other than the disciples of the cultivation pavilion. Each and every one of their faces sank. When did a main faction disciple get forced into this state by a subsidiary faction disciple? This was truly a disgrace to the cultivation pavilion. Gu Qingyun's expression was indescribably gloomy. From the standpoint of a friend, he should hope that Yu Qianqiu would win. From the standpoint of reputation, he naturally hoped that the main faction disciple would win. After all, he was a member of the cultivation pavilion, and if he lost face, he would also be implicated. Thinking a little more, Gu Qingyun gnashed his teeth in anger. That fellow was truly hateful. Leaving aside the fact that he sneak attacked, it was fine if he took advantage of Qin Wendian at the start. But why did he have to say such harsh words? Now, Qin Wendian had sent his words back to Gu Qingyun. Gu Qingyun didn't even have a path to retreat. If it was a normal win or loss, then no one would say anything. Just like Lu Guang at the beginning. But things had become like this. The two of them bullied and scolded each other, implicating the two factions behind them. Right now, it was no longer a matter of two people, but a matter of the reputation of the two factions. It was a matter of life and death, and no one could take a step back. The majority of the disciples of the cultivation pavilion had the same thoughts as Gu Qingyun. The disciples of the other factions were extremely excited. Yu Qianzhou had really made the subsidiary factions proud. The number 6 arena was still rumbling non-stop. The arena with a radius of tens of meters was already much shorter than the surrounding area. That disciple was also suffering in silence. He was still fleeing in all directions, and his whole body was already covered in sweat. Seeing that he refused to admit defeat, Yu Qianzhou sneered and prepared to kill him. However, from the beginning, he had no intention of letting him go, even though he had already admitted defeat. Bastard, I don't want to play with you anymore. Hand over your life. Yu Qianzhou shouted loudly. He pointed with his finger and the dazzling sword will behind him split into 10 rays of sword light. Xiao xiao. The rays of sword light quickly rushed down. Ah! That disciple suddenly shouted and raised his hand. A golden bracelet on his wrist flashed with a golden light. In an instant, that golden light enveloped his entire body. More than 10 rays of cold light that were shooting at high speed collided with the bracelet, making ding ding dang dang sounds. One after another, they were all knocked away. F***CK. What is this? Yu Qianzhou looked down in a daze. The surrounding people were also in an uproar. Diamond bracelet. Guan Weiwu, who was on the pavilion, was startled at first. Then, he turned his head and said angrily, Elder O, what is the meaning of this? How can you allow a disciple to bring a magic weapon into the arena? This is too unfair to the other disciples. Oh Sihai glanced at him and said expressionlessly, who said that magic weapons can't be brought into the arena? Who allowed your alchemy pavilion disciple to bring so many flying swords into the arena? Isn't this unfair to the other disciples? That's because of the sword technique he cultivates. He can control so many flying swords at the same time, so it doesn't matter if he brings more flying swords. Guan Weiwu defended himself. His own disciple was about to win, but the other side actually brought out a magic weapon. How could he not be angry? That diamond bracelet wasn't given to him by the cultivation pavilion. When he went out to cultivate, he killed a demonic path disciple and obtained it with his own ability. Why can't he use something that belongs to him? Oh Sihai sneered, then suddenly turned his head and said in a deep voice, Guan Weiwu, who gave you the right to speak to me like this? Guan Weiwu was stunned. Oh Sihai's cultivation had reached the peak of the middle stage of the tribulation passing stage. He was a bit stronger than the sect leader. According to seniority in the outside world, he was his father's junior brother. He was a generation older than the sect leader and belonged to the same branch of the Guan family. Senior brother. You be the judge. Guan Weiwu didn't dare to show his power and could only look for his senior brother, the sect leader. Feng Xiangtian looked down, paused, and said, a magic weapon obtained with one's own ability is naturally a part of one's strength. This is fair to everyone. The two of you don't need to argue anymore. Although the last sentence seemed to be reprimanding the two of them, in general, it was obvious that he was on O Sihai's side. Yes, sect leader. O Sihai responded with a smile and looked down without saying anything. Guan Weiwu's face twitched, but he also had nothing to say. Chapter 156. After the disciple was enveloped by the golden light barrier, he let out a breath and his expression gradually calmed down. Yu Qianzhou didn't believe it and controlled his flying sword to attack again. After a series of clanging sounds, the thin, transparent barrier didn't react at all. What a powerful magic treasure. The disciples of the various factions felt that it was a pity. Yu Qianzhou was about to win, but his opponent actually came up with such a thing. Xiao Wanqing turned to Ko Shuahua and asked, Marshal and Co., what is that egg-shaped light barrier? It has such a strong defense. I think Yu Qianzhou's flying sword can't do anything to it. Ko Shuahua stared at the location of the competition and frowned. It's the Vajra bracelet, a top-notch mid-grade defensive magic treasure. The light barrier it emits is called the Vidra barrier. As long as the cultivator using this treasure has enough vitality, even an early-stage tribulation-passing cultivator won't be able to break it. I just don't know how such a magic treasure fell into the hands of a late-stage core formation cultivator. Ah! A top-notch mid-grade defensive magic treasure. Xiao Wanqing was stunned. Even in a large sect like the supporting Immortal Island, only nascent soul cultivators could get a low-grade magic treasure. Usually, it was only an offensive magic treasure. A top-notch mid-grade defensive magic treasure could almost be considered a low-grade high-grade magic treasure. It should be known that magic treasures that could protect one's life were very difficult to refine. Not everyone had the opportunity to obtain one. With one in hand, it wouldn't be a problem to protect one's life. After all, in the cultivation world, as long as you weren't too unlucky, you wouldn't always encounter mid-stage tribulation-passing opponents. The disciple in the barrier took out a handful of chi recovery pills and put one in his mouth. He stared at Yu Qianqiu with a gloomy expression. Xiao Wanqing said regretfully, he still has chi recovery pills. It seems that even Yu Qianqiu can't do anything to him. In each faction, there were seniors like Ko Shuahua who knew what was good for them. Soon, the news that the disciple was using the Vidra bracelet spread. Everyone felt that it was a pity. It seemed that no one could do anything to the other. After Yu Qianqiu struck the light barrier for a while, he lost his temper and couldn't help but curse, "You coward. If you have the guts, then come out and fight me fair and square. What are you hiding in there for? You shameless thing." A grand late core formation disciple is actually scared of an early core formation cultivator like this. If you have the guts, then get the hell out here. How could the true cultivation pavilion produce trash like you? Damn it. Damn it. Aside from sneak attacks, you only know how to hide like a turtle. Today, I've learned the skills of the cultivation pavilion. The disciple looked at Yu Qianqiu with resentment and cursed loudly. He clenched his fists so hard that they made popping sounds. Even if he left the competition alive today, he wouldn't have the face to see anyone after being tormented by Yu Qianqiu like this. After the impulse, he calmed down. However, his expression was frighteningly gloomy. After all, his life was more important. As long as he was alive, he wouldn't have to worry about not having a chance to take revenge. The disciples of the cultivation pavilion who were watching from the sidelines were so angry at Yu Qianqiu that they gnashed their teeth. If he cursed, then so be it. Why did he have to curse the entire cultivation pavilion? Those words were too hurtful. All the elders in the pavilion looked at each other in dismay. They had never seen such a thing happen in all the previous competitions, and they had never seen a disciple like Yu Qianqiu who didn't even have the least bit of pretense, and was like a shrew who threw a tantrum in public. Guan Weiwu and Ferdinand were a little dumbfounded. The former had never seen this side of his disciple. It was really too much. The latter did not expect his future son-in-law to be like this. Although he had seen Yu Qianqiu act shamelessly in the 10,000 Fragrance Garden, he had never seen such a shameless act in public. Oh, Sihai's face was frighteningly gloomy. As the principal elder of the cultivation pavilion, how could he be happy when he saw someone pointing at the cultivation pavilion's nose and cursing like this, let alone in front of so many people? He turned his head and said in a deep voice, "Guan Weiwu, is this your personal disciple?" That Elder O, he might have been muddled by the sneak attack of your disciple. I will definitely scold him when I get back. While Guan Weiwu was apologizing, he heard his disciple on the other side was still cursing without restraint. His vulgarities were increasing, and the more he cursed, the uglier it was. Guan Weiwu smiled apologetically and wiped his forehead. Feng Xiangtian also frowned. His lips moved a few times as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. This competition was originally for the disciples to fight with their lives. To put it bluntly, no matter what method you used to win, it was still a part of your strength. His disciple almost lost his life in the beginning, so a few curses like this was nothing. It was just that it was indeed a little outrageous. The disciples of the various sects had seen it today. A competition could actually be like this. They did not know if Yu Qianqiu had won glory for the auxiliary disciples today or if he had lost face. All of them were speechless as they listened to him cursing in different ways. Gu Qingyun, who was in the cultivation pavilion's crowd, was dumbfounded and did not know whether to laugh or cry. Xiao Wanqing's small red lips froze for a while before she turned to look at the crowd and said embarrassedly, "Is that really Yu Qianqiu?" She really did not expect that the mighty and omnipotent Yu Qianqiu in her heart would actually have this side to him. It completely overturned her image in her heart. Those people that Yu Qianqiu had saved from the demon ghost region were the same. Was this still the same Yu Qianqiu who sang and played the zither in the demon ghost region and chatted cheerfully with the ghost general? Bastard, coward, son of AB*TCH. Yu Qianqiu stood in the air for a long time and cursed for a long time. Seeing that the other party was not moved by his provocation, he finally stopped. He immediately felt his true essence was a little exhausted and his mouth was a little dry. He immediately took out a handful of energy recovery pills and stuffed them all into his mouth like candy. After recovering his true essence, he held his chin and flew around the Vidra barrier a few times. Suddenly, he slapped his forehead as if he had suddenly realized something and reached his hand into his storage bag. This made the disciple below nervous, not knowing what he was going to do. Yu Qianqiu took out a few yellow talismans and laughed sinisterly. How could he have forgotten about the astral breaching talismans made by Chen Feng? He had wasted so much saliva. Whether it was useful or not, he had to try it first. He took out a talisman with 2 fingers and slowly raised it up. It immediately attracted everyone's attention. The disciple immediately felt that something was wrong. He immediately poured a large amount of true essence into the Vidra bracelet. The golden light barrier immediately became golden, clearly strengthening its defensive capabilities. A yellow light shot out from Yu Qianqiu's hand towards the Vidra barrier. With a loud bang, the disciple and the barrier were blasted several times. When he crawled up with a face full of fear, he found that the Vidra barrier was not damaged at all. He could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Damn! How can it be so sturdy? Again. Yu Qianqiu threw the astral breaching talismans one after another, causing a series of loud booms. The spectating disciples were speechless. Fernan, who was in the pavilion, frowned. It seems like the astral breaching talisman that can break nascent soul stages' true chi. Where did this kid get it? Elder Mo, who was a few steps away, shook his head with both hands on the railing. That disciple was vicious in the previous 2 rounds. This time, he has met his nemesis. With his cultivation, I'm afraid that he will not be in a good state even if he does not get injured. Guan Weiwu, who was standing at the side, smiled. He was too embarrassed to continue protecting his disciple. Yu Qianqiu had a total of 6 astral breaching talismans. After using them all at once, he realized that they still could not do anything to him. The defense of the light barrier was too good. The disciple was blasted to the ground 6 times in a row. His face was deathly pale. Fortunately, he wasn't injured. He stared at his opponent in the air as if his eyes were about to burst into flames. He raised his hand and stuffed another energy recovery pill into his mouth. What are you looking at? If you are not convinced, come out if you have the guts. Yu Qianqiu was very annoyed by his gaze. If he did not take the opportunity to kill him this time, he did not know what kind of revenge he would attract in the future. He immediately shouted, "An iron rod can be ground into a needle. I don't believe that I cannot break your tortoise shell." He put his palms together and his 10 fingers turned to form a shadow. It was as bright as a lotus flower. Dozens of cold lights appeared from his storage bag. The flying swords on his back also flashed. Nearly 100 flying swords danced in the air at the same time. It was a spectacular scene. Everyone had never seen a person control so many flying swords at the same time. They all stared at the sky in shock. Chapter 157. Yu Qianqiu floated in the air on his sword with a ruthless look on his face. Cold lights and shadows were everywhere around him, dancing all over the sky. When Yu Qianqiu moved in the air, there were nearly 100 cold lights following him. Every time his limbs moved, the sword shadows in the sky would be in a commotion. Everything was under his control, and his momentum was extraordinary. Feng Xiangtian, who was in the attic, suddenly narrowed his eyes and said, "If I remember correctly, there seems to be a set of sword skills in the Sutra's depository called Guiyuan Sword Skill. The higher the cultivation, the more flying swords you can control. Yu Qianqiu should be practicing this set of sword skills." Oh Sihai, who was beside him, nodded, then shook his head and said, "The Guiyuan sword skill doesn't seem to be so fast and powerful. Otherwise, many disciples would have practiced it." Feng Xiangtian's eyes flashed, and he said in a low voice, "I'm afraid it has been modified by him. If that's the case, then this Yu Qianqiu's cultivation talent is really extraordinary." Oh Sihai frowned and did not say anything. He did not believe what the head said. Modified the cultivation method. What a joke. The person who was most familiar with the cultivation method was the creator of the method. How could other people who practiced this method change it randomly? Unless he was not afraid of death or qigong deviation. In fact, both Feng Xiangtian and O Sihai were right. However, the latter did not know that when Yu Qianqiu was modifying this sword technique, there were indeed many times when he almost went berserk. However, whenever his body was damaged or about to collapse, the golden bead in his body would display its miraculous effect, constantly repairing and maintaining his body. That was why Yu Qianqiu, who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth, changed this sword technique of Guiyuan into his own unique sword technique. As for his talent in cultivation, it probably had nothing to do with it. All the people who were familiar with Yu Qianqiu were stunned. They did not know how many more secrets this guy had. In short, once he did it, it was very eye-catching. Just when everyone was guessing what he was going to do, Yu Qianqiu stretched out 2 fingers and drew 2 circles in the air. Close to 100 flying swords followed his gestures and split into 2, forming 2 circles of swords behind him. In the eyes of the surrounding people, it was as if he had grown a pair of glowing wings on his back. The disciple hiding in the Vajra barrier panicked once more. Although the astral breaker talismans did not harm him, the explosion had caused his blood and qi to churn, making him feel unbearably uncomfortable. It took him a long time to calm down, but from the looks of it, the fellow in the sky was going to do something again. It was a matter of life and death, so it would be strange if he was not afraid. The light barrier protecting him became golden again. "Quick!" Yu Qianqiu shouted at the 2 circles of swords behind him. One of the 2 circles of swords behind him suddenly broke off, forming 2 long dragons on the left and right, pouncing toward the golden egg below. Immediately, a series of clanking sounds of metal colliding rang out. As the clanking sounds rang out, Yu Qianqiu moved his fingers again. The 2 sword dragons once again formed 2 circles, connecting with each other in a circulatory cycle manner. They kept colliding with the golden egg, and the rapid and sharp sounds of collision rang out. This scene fell into the eyes of the crowd, as if the 2 wings on Yu Qianqiu's body had grown onto the golden egg below. Suddenly, Yu Qianqiu moved his fingers and pointed down. The 2 high-speed circles of swords immediately sped up, turning into 2 beams of light. The sounds of collision were no longer rapid, but a continuous, sharp, ear-piercing sound. After listening for a while, the crowd felt a sense of irritation in their chests. They felt flustered and immediately circulated their chi to resist. Yu Qianqiu looked down with a determined expression. He took out a handful of chi recovery pills and stuffed them into his mouth. Damn it. I'm going to drag it out with you today. I don't believe that this turtle shell can protect you forever. Everyone could see that he wanted to fight a protracted battle, but the noise was really disturbing and uncomfortable. What they didn't know was that the disciple in the light barrier was suffering 1,000 times more than the crowd. The sharp, bone-piercing sound was right beside his ears. He couldn't hide even if he wanted to. He could only sit down cross-legged and circulate his chi to resist. Elder Mo of the Artifact Refining Pavilion, who was on the pavilion, asked in surprise, "Old Guan, what is your disciple doing?" Guan Weiwu turned around and rolled his eyes at him. He thought to himself, "You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" After a while, Elder Mo suddenly shouted, "Oh no, look at the disciple in the Vidra barrier." The people on the pavilion looked over. It was so far away that they couldn't see clearly. They immediately circulated their chi to take a closer look. When they saw clearly, they were all shocked. The disciple's face was pale and his body was trembling non-stop. His eyes, mouth, nose, ears, and other orifices were bleeding. His appearance was dispirited and miserable. It was obvious that he was injured. How could this be? Feng Xiangtian was also shocked. The group of elders looked at each other in dismay. Even with their cultivation and knowledge, no one could tell how Yu Qianqiu had injured that disciple. In fact, Yu Qianqiu himself didn't know what was going on. He was the closest to the disciple, so he was the first to notice the abnormality. At first, he saw that the disciple was shivering in the turtle shell. He didn't pay much attention to it. When he noticed that something was wrong, he focused and saw that the disciple was bleeding from his orifices. What was going on? After a while, Yu Qianqiu came to a realization. It was probably the high-intensity noise he made that injured the disciple. No matter what, he was someone who had lived in the technological era for so many years in his previous life. Of course, he knew that the sound waves produced by noise could also kill people. Damn! It was a lucky hit. So it was like this. Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed. The speed of the flying sword was raised to the limit. The ear-piercing sound made the people around them feel disturbed. Yu Qianqiu stared at the disciple's reaction in the turtle shell. When he saw that the disciple was shaking even more violently, he knew that he had guessed correctly. He stuffed another chi recovery pill into his mouth and thought, "Bastard, let's see how long you can resist." Not long after, everyone suddenly noticed that the light emitted by the Vidra shield was flickering. Even the disciples in the early stage of Foundation establishment could see that something was wrong. Yu Qianqiu sneered again and again. He could clearly see that the person inside was not only bleeding from his 7 orifices, but even his pores were oozing blood. Yet, he was still stubbornly resisting. It seemed that he was not far from death. Everyone in the attic naturally saw this. Elder Mo sighed and said, "I'm afraid it's almost over." Everyone had their own thoughts and were silent. Only O Sihai's face was frighteningly gloomy. Ah! Suddenly, the surroundings boiled. The Vidra shield on the cultivation pavilion disciple's body suddenly disappeared. His whole body was finally exposed. He was covered in blood and fell to the ground. Bang! Yu Qianqiu's face was full of joy as he shouted. After waiting for a long time, he finally succeeded. If he didn't act now, then when would he? He understood the principle of delay. Nearly 100 cold lights swarmed toward the disciple like a flock of crows fighting for food. Now everyone knew that the disciple was dead for sure. O Sihai, who was in the attic, slammed his palm on the railing. His lips were tightly shut and his face was gloomy. He didn't say a word. Feng Xiangtian glanced at him and didn't say anything. On the other hand, Guan Weiwu was a bit like a thief. His disciple defeated his opponent, but he didn't show any joy. Instead, he secretly looked at the people on both sides. With a burst of blood mist, the flying swords completed their mission. They turned into cold lights and flashed back into Yu Qianzhou's storage pouch. When the blood mist dissipated, there was nothing left except a pool of blood on the ground. Yu Qianzhou floated to the ground. The long sword under his feet fell into his hand. He walked to the pool of blood, picked up the bloody bracelet with his sword, and put it into his storage pouch. He casually threw the sword back into the scabbard on his back and walked toward the alchemy pavilion disciples as if nothing had happened. Chapter 158. Silence. The surroundings were very quiet. Everyone was still immersed in the moment when the flying sword dismembered the body. No one could have imagined that a flying sword could be used to such a bloody extent that not even a piece of flesh or bone could be found. The most frightening thing was that with Yu Qianzhou's cultivation, he was actually able to break the middle-grade defensive magic treasure, the Vajra bracelet. No one could see how he did it. In any case, the person inside was killed by him just like that. The first to wake up were the supervising elders. Because Yu Qianzhou's matches were too eye-catching, there were still a few matches that hadn't been decided and had already stopped. At this moment, under the reprimand of the elders, the matches continued. However, no one dared to kill each other anymore. Yu Qianzhou's previous actions were already very clear. Those who wanted to kill him had better not meet him, or else the consequences would be very tragic. Lu Guang and that disciple were in stark contrast. The former was unharmed while the latter's bones couldn't even be found. This competition was decided by drawing lots. Who could guarantee that they wouldn't meet Yu Qianzhou? Who still thought that they could beat Yu Qianzhou with their late core formation cultivation? In the end, the remaining people competed peacefully. After the winners and losers were decided, nothing happened. The spectators, on the other hand, felt that it wasn't intense enough and lacked interest. After the match was over, someone immediately came to the competition venue to repair the ground that had been smashed. The atmosphere over at the cultivation pavilion was oppressive. The disciples who were about to compete were all secretly thinking about who would be unlucky enough to meet Yu Qianzhou. Those who had killed in the previous 2 matches were even more nervous. Xiao Wanqing, who was on the 10,000 Fragrance Garden side, felt that something was wrong. She didn't say anything and smiled like a flower. Her eyes flickered as she looked at the disciple who had just won. Her expression was worth thinking about. In reality, she wasn't the only one looking over. There were too many disciples from each faction to count. It was just that their gazes were different from hers. The disciples of the alchemy pavilion all looked as if they were on steroids. They stood there in high spirits as if they were afraid that others wouldn't know they were disciples of the alchemy pavilion. Yang Qian grinned and said, "Yu Qianzhou, you sure hit it well." "What? Are you going to defeat all the disciples of the cultivation pavilion?" Hearing this, the nearby disciples all gathered their heads, wanting to hear how Elder Guan's direct disciple would answer. Yu Qianzhou scratched his head and said modestly, "Martial Uncle Yang thinks too highly of me, I was just lucky just now." The cultivation pavilion is filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. It's already not bad if I can enter the top 10. Ha! Martial Uncle Yu is too modest. That's right. Martial Uncle, don't stand on ceremony when the time comes. When it's time to strike, strike. This martial Uncle Yu was usually very amiable and did not put on any airs. At this moment, the disciples from the alchemy pavilion were laughing and fanning the flames, causing the disciples from the other factions to be filled with envy. Disciples participating in the 4th round, draw lots. Dongfang Chang Ao shouted. Yu Qianzhou cupped his hands at the crowd, and as usual, walked over leisurely. Many of the disciples sighed in their hearts. Looking at how calm he was, it seemed he already had a card up his sleeve. This was the demeanor of an expert, this was the demeanor of a master. After 3 rounds of the competition, those who relied on luck or coincidence were almost all eliminated. The remaining people were definitely late core formation stage experts. Yu Qianzhou looked at the remaining 100 people and was slightly stunned. He found that they were all standing next to the lottery box and looking at him, not knowing what to do. While Yu Qianzhou was confused, Dongfang Chang Ao looked at the disciples in front of him and said in a low voice, "Yu Qianzhou, come here and draw lots." "Ah! Oh!" Yu Qianzhou quickly ran over. No matter what the reason was, he had already offended the old guy, so he couldn't do it again. Just as his hand was about to reach into the lottery box, someone suddenly shouted from upstairs, "Wait, Chang Ao, bring Yu Qianzhou up here." The 2 people who were called looked up and saw it was the sect leader, Feng Xiangtian. Yu Qianzhou was stunned again and then followed Dongfang Chang Ao into the cultivation pavilion's main hall. When he climbed to the top floor, he saw the sect leader and the other elders and quickly bowed. In his heart, he was trying to figure out why he was called up. All the old guy's attention was on Yu Qianzhou. Feng Xiangtian gently waved his hand and said, "Chang Ao, pass on my decree. Yu Qianzhou is directly promoted to the top 10 of the core formation stage. He doesn't need to participate in the rest of the competition. The others can continue to compete. You can go down first." Dongfang Chang Ao paused. This was completely against the rules of the competition, but since the sect leader said it was a decree, there was no problem. He immediately clasped his hands and said, "Yes, sect leader." Then he left. What are these old guys doing? While Yu Qianzhou was puzzled, Dongfang Chang Ao's voice came from below. "Pass on the sect leader's decree. Yu Qianzhou is directly promoted to the top 10 of the core formation stage. He doesn't need to participate in the rest of the competition. The others can continue to draw lots." At first, there was an uproar outside, but then it quieted down. Everyone thought about it and agreed. With Yu Qianzhou's strength, it wouldn't be a problem for him to enter the top 10. To put it bluntly, there was no one left who could deal with his pile of flying swords. The remaining disciples were relieved when they heard this. Without that guy, it would be much safer. However, he didn't know that sect head Feng Xiangtian had other considerations. The Pavilion of Cultivation had been the foundation of supporting Immortal Island for thousands of years. If they continued to compete and were defeated by Yu Qianzhou along the way, then they would be in big trouble. The Pavilion of Cultivation would lose all of its face. Therefore, he decided to not let him compete in the later rounds and use his authority as the sect head to let him directly enter the top 10. The group of old guys knew that after watching 2 rounds, none of the Cultivation Pavilion's core formation stage disciples were Yu Qianzhou's opponent. They naturally knew the sect leader's intention. Feng Xiangtian looked at Yu Qianzhou and smiled. "Yu Qianzhou, don't think too much. I will ask you a few questions, and you have to answer me honestly. Can you do that?" Yu Qianzhou's brain turned a few times. He bowed and said, "Since the sect leader is asking, I will tell you everything I know." "Very good." Feng Xiangtian nodded and smiled. "Then let me ask you. The sword technique you practice is very powerful. What is it called? Where did it come from?" Yu Qianzhou had thought of these questions a long time ago. Since he took it out to show off, he knew that this day would come sooner or later, so he was well prepared to deal with it. He replied respectfully, "The sword technique I practice comes from the Sutra Pavilion. It is called the Guiyuan sword technique, but..." He paused and continued, "But during the process of practicing, I found that there were some flaws in this technique. Therefore, I spent a lot of effort to improve it. I don't know if it is still the Guiyuan sword technique. He wasn't clear about these things and didn't know what the consequences of saying these things would be. Everyone immediately gasped. This kid really changed the sword technique to practice. Such talent. Even those who have reached the final stage of the passing calamity stage wouldn't dare to casually change a technique to practice. Newborn calves are not afraid of tigers. The Guan clan has produced another talent. Guan Weiwu and Ferdinand looked at each other with indescribable feelings. Feng Xiangtian smiled and revealed an as-expected expression. He continued to ask, how many flying swords can you control now? Where did these flying swords of yours come from? I have already reached the limit of flying swords I can control today. There are a total of 100 flying swords. As for the flying swords, I practiced the sword technique to a certain stage and didn't have any more flying swords to use, so I almost gave up on practicing this sword technique. In the end, I used up the 1,000 upper spiritual stones that the sect leader gave me. The flying swords were bought by senior brother Qingjingxing from the Secular Objects Hall. Yu Qianqiu looked like he had no choice but to do so. I see. Feng Xiangtian nodded and glanced at Guan Weiwu expressionlessly. He was furious. Yu Qianqiu started with alchemy and reached the early stage of the core formation stage in just a few years. Now, he even created his own cultivation technique. Such talent was rare in the cultivation world. This muddle-headed master didn't know anything. Because he didn't have any flying swords to use, he almost forced me to give up on studying this sword technique. If I really gave up, who would see such a powerful sword technique on Fuxian Island today? This muddle-headed thing. Elder Mo, Yu Qianqiu can go to the equipment refining pavilion to get the magic tools he lacks for cultivation in the future. Try to cooperate if you can. Feng Xiangtian's voice was a little gloomy. Chapter 159. Yes, sect leader. After Elder Mo responded, he looked at Yu Qianqiu and said with a smile, it's a pity to stay in the elixir refinery pavilion with such cultivation talent. It's better to transfer you to the cultivation pavilion. Yu Qianqiu didn't know how to answer this question, so he obediently pretended not to hear it. Oh Sihai, who originally had a gloomy expression, raised his eyebrows inadvertently. He looked up and down at Yu Qianqiu and thought to himself, that's right. Why didn't I think of it? With such cultivation talent, he should come to my cultivation pavilion. Isn't hiding in the elixir refinery pavilion a waste of talent? Besides, it's not shameful for a disciple to compete with another disciple. Oh Sihai's expression relaxed, and he started to have ideas about Yu Qianqiu. We all saw that disciple die under your sword just now. However, before the Vajra shield broke, that disciple had already bled to death. What magic art did you use? Feng Xiangtian asked again. Yu Qianqiu scratched his head and smiled. I didn't use any magic art. He died from being noisy. Noisy to death. Are you kidding me? The group of old guys exchanged glances. Nonsense. Oh Sihai said coldly. Sigh. A bunch of illiterates. Seeing that they didn't believe him, Yu Qianqiu bowed to O Sihai and said, if Elder O doesn't believe me, would you like to accompany me to do an experiment? Elder O will understand once you try. How do I do it? O Sihai took a few steps forward. There was a large bell hanging low on the top floor of the cultivation pavilion. Yu Qianqiu saw it when he came up. He walked in front of the bell and shook the baton to hit the bell. Dong! A dull and distant sound came from the top of the building. Everyone downstairs looked up, not knowing what was going on up there. Yu Qianqiu pointed to the bell with a little embarrassment and said, Elder O, can you bend down and stand in the bell for a while? Without saying a word, Oh Sihai bent down and stood in the bell, shouting, "You try, dong." Before he finished speaking, the bell had been rung by Yu Qianqiu. From the bottom of the bell, Oh Sihai's body could be seen trembling. After the buzzing sound stopped, Yu Qianqiu said with respect, "Elder Oh, you can come out now." After waiting for a while, Oh Sihai came out with a strange look on his face. He hadn't prepared anything just now, so he was immediately shocked by the sound of the bell. "Elder Oh, what's wrong with you?" everyone asked when they saw his strange expression. Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed in his heart. The old man must be suffering. Oh Sihai shook his head and said dully, "It was so loud. I wasn't prepared and almost fainted." Guan Weiwu walked to the front of the bell and knocked it twice. He said hesitantly, "The sound is indeed loud, but it shouldn't be enough to make people faint. Old Phil, I'll go in and try. You knock it and see." After that, he also went in. Ferdinand rolled his eyes and walked over angrily. He shook the pestle and hit it hard. Plop. Guan Weiwu sat on the ground, covered his ears with his hands and rolled out. He climbed up shakily, but he was still a little unsteady. After a long time, he calmed down and exhaled, "So powerful." At this time, everyone knew that what Yu Qianqiu said was true, but they still didn't understand the reason. After all, they and Yu Qianqiu's ideas were completely different, so it was understandable. Feng Xiangtian pondered and said, "Yu Qianqiu, do you mean that the disciple died because of your noise?" "Yes." Yu Qianqiu said respectfully, "That disciple was hiding inside the Vidra barrier. I used my flying swords to continuously attack it. The sound he heard inside was 1,000 times louder than what we heard outside. After a while, no one would be able to endure it. Naturally, he was shaken to death." Yu Qianqiu had originally wanted to explain to them what noise and sound waves were, but after thinking about it, he figured that they wouldn't understand, so he didn't say anything. It was enough to let them understand the general meaning, so that they wouldn't be long-winded. Everyone looked at each other. It was the first time they knew that sound could kill. Feng Xiangtian nodded and said, "Yu Qianqiu, why do you want to participate in this competition?" Yu Qianqiu said respectfully, "I want to go out and broaden my horizons. Then you should know that the outside is not like the inside of Fuxian Island. There are dangers at all times. Aren't you afraid?" Feng Xiangtian said. "How can I see the rainbow without going through wind and rain?" "I'm not afraid," Yu Qianqiu replied solemnly. The group of old guys nodded. Feng Xiangtian smiled and said, "How can I see the rainbow without going through wind and rain?" "Well said, hee. Yu Qianqiu, you can leave first." Yu Qianqiu bowed to everyone and was about to leave. Oh Sihai said, "Yu Qianqiu, the Vidra bracelet belongs to a disciple of the cultivation pavilion. It should be taken back. Seeing that you are going out to gain experience, the cultivation pavilion will give it to you to protect yourself." Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He thanked him and left. The group of elders stared at Oh Sihai strangely. Elder Mo said, "Elder O, when did you become so generous?" Oh Sihai glared at him and ignored him. He followed the sect leader to stand in front of the railing to watch the competition below. Feng Xiangtian looked at Yu Qianqiu walking away and sighed. Through this conversation, he was very fond of Yu Qianqiu. At such a young age, with such talent, his future was limitless. Unfortunately, he was not his own personal disciple. Thinking of this, he glanced at Guan Weiwu and sighed in his heart. Since the following competition had nothing to do with him, Yu Qianqiu was too lazy to watch anymore. He said goodbye to the disciples of the Alchemy Pavilion and left the Cultivation Pavilion's territory. He flew straight to the Alchemy Pavilion on his sword. When the other disciples of the Alchemy Pavilion saw that Yu Qianqiu had left, they also felt that there was no point in the competition and left. The disciples of each faction also came for Yu Qianqiu. When the main character left, they all left one after another. The entire square was suddenly left with the cultivation pavilion performing a one-man show. The group of old guys in the alchemy pavilion finally understood who the main character of this competition was. In the following days, Yu Qianqiu did not watch any of the finals and nascent soul stage competitions. He did what he was supposed to do. He did not know that his name had once again spread throughout supporting Xian Island, causing a group of Qi condensation stage disciples who had no chance to watch the competition to be filled with regret. They often pestered the seniors who had watched the competition to talk about it. As for the so-called seniors of the various lineages, they were filled with admiration for Yu Qianqiu. When they spoke, they couldn't help but add oil and vinegar. As a result, a climax of learning from Yu Qianqiu was set off in supporting Immortal Island. In particular, when it was said that Yu Qianqiu cultivated the Guiyuan sword technique of the Sutra Pavilion, a group of Qi condensation stage disciples were amazed. It turned out that supporting Xian Island had such a powerful sword technique. They immediately set their cultivation goal on the Guiyuan sword technique after they reached the foundation establishment stage. The Sutra Pavilion was also very lively these days. Some foundation establishment stage disciples all went to study the Guiyuan sword technique. As a result, a scene that had not been seen on supporting Xian Island for thousands of years appeared. There were tens of thousands of disciples on supporting Xian Island. Because there was only one sword technique and it could not be taken out, those who came could only memorize it. As a result, countless foundation establishment stage disciples lined up in the Sutra Pavilion. Some people saw that the scene was so lively, and they were afraid that they would not be able to line up. They even brought food to line up overnight. Of course, some people with higher cultivation levels also came. Everyone had seen the competition that day, so they naturally wanted to see what was so special about the Guiyuan sword technique. It actually allowed Yu Qianqiu to kill disciples with higher cultivation levels than him. It was really worth learning from. Chapter 160. A few days later, the results of the competition were out. 5 nascent soul stage disciples and 10 core formation stage disciples were confirmed. Yu Qianqiu got what he wanted, so he was naturally one of them. Furong knew that Yu Qianqiu was going to leave tomorrow, so she spent the entire day in Alchemy Pavilion, Yu Qianqiu's exclusive courtyard. The two of them were about to part, so it was inevitable that they would say some sweet nothings. The stone table in the courtyard was filled with food. Naturally, it was brought by a certain someone. Furong sat on the side with an unhappy expression. She pouted and said, "What am I going to do if you leave? If I had known earlier, I would have gone to participate in the competition." Knowing that she didn't want to part with him, Yu Qianqiu smiled but didn't say anything. He thought, if you want to participate in the competition, your old man won't agree even if you beat him to death. In this shitty sect, killing people doesn't even happen in the blink of an eye. It's as normal as eating a damn meal. AI. This girl. After her face was healed, she was clearly more cheerful than before. She also talked more. Unfortunately, her personality was still a bit introverted. But that was also good. She was so beautiful. If she was too extroverted, she would definitely make him wear a green hat. She was a beauty. It was like this. If you didn't provoke others, there would be others who would provoke you. Qianqiu, you're the most resourceful. Think of a way to bring me out as well. Furong's smile was like a flower. She got up and picked up the wine pot, pouring wine for Yu Qianqiu and flattering him. Yu Qianqiu was pestered by her for a long time. It really was a bit of a headache. His eyes turned and he suddenly stared at Furong's chest. What's wrong? Furong saw that his gaze was strange. She also looked at her chest, but didn't find anything abnormal. It could be seen that Furong was already used to his actions. Yu Qianqiu shook his head solemnly and said, "That's not right. It seems to be a lot bigger than last time. What's going on?" "Really?" Furong suspiciously looked at her chest. Suddenly, she caught a glimpse of Yu Qianqiu's snickering. She immediately understood that he was teasing her again. Blushing, she threw the wine cup in her hand at him. Yu Qianqiu dodged to the side and grabbed her wrist, pulling her into his arms. He chuckled and said, "Look at you, a girl. How can you touch a man in broad daylight? Aren't you afraid of being seen by others?" Furong herself didn't know what was going on, but every time she was pulled into his embrace, she would feel as if her whole body had lost all its strength. He struggled weakly and said, "Who told you to always bully me?" "Nonsense, why would I bully you? If I say it's big, then it's big. You don't believe me. I'll bring you in for a checkup right now." Yu Qianqiu abruptly picked her up and walked into the room, causing Hibiscus to cry out in alarm again. "Quack! Scream! Scream! I'm the only one living here. Even if you shout yourself hoarse, no one will know." Not long after, the sound of two people fighting came from the room again. The two of them were lying on the bed with their clothes disheveled. Yu Qianqiu's fingers had already felt a moist spot. He wanted to explore it again, but the beauty beside him said, "No." Immediately, his fingers were clamped by the elastic thighs. Yu Qianqiu groaned in infinite sorrow. He pulled out his sinful hand and cursed in his heart, "Damn it. These days where I can see and touch but not eat are too torturous. Lousy, sex is emptiness, emptiness is sex. Amitba. I'll endure. Endure. Endure." The two of them lazily hugged each other. Furong suddenly asked, "When will you come back?" Yu Qianqiu answered half dead, "I don't know. I probably won't be back for a while." The two of them sank into silence again. The soft hand on Yu Qianqiu's chest suddenly rose up. She grabbed his trembling hand and pressed it on her plump breasts. Yu Qianqiu was startled. He turned his head and smiled bitterly, "I say, little sister. Big brother, I have already endured very hard. Don't seduce me anymore." Furong let out an almost inaudible sound. She whimpered, "I'll give it to you." "What did you say?" Yu Qianqiu sat up. His eyes swept back and forth across that alluring body. He said very seriously, "I'm very pure. It's very easy for me to believe other people's words. You must not speak carelessly. The God is watching. Repeat what you said just now." "I didn't hear it clearly." Furong's face flushed red. She didn't dare to repeat it. She turned her graceful body to the side and didn't say another word. Yu Qianqiu laughed mischievously. He leaned over to her ear and asked, "You're not afraid anymore?" Furong softly replied, "N.G.G.A." Yu Qianqiu looked up to the sky and laughed wildly, "Cake seller. Long live Chairman Mao." Then he pounced on her as if he was starving. The spring night was bitter and short. The sun rose high in the sky. The hibiscus bloomed to express the feelings of spring. It was a splendid night. Only the two people in the room knew about it. Yu Qianqiu looked down at Furong's smooth and tender body. In his previous life, he walked among flowers. He had plucked countless flowers. He was very experienced. But in this life, he was still a virgin. He didn't expect Furong to take advantage of this era's essence. It wasn't easy. While she was sleeping soundly, Yu Qianqiu quietly got up and put on his clothes. Just as he turned around, he saw a pair of extremely bashful big eyes looking at him. He couldn't help but smile awkwardly. "You're awake." He hated the sadness of parting. He wanted to sneak away. Are you leaving? I'll send you. Furong picked up a piece of clothing to cover her chest. Suddenly, she frowned. Biting her lips, she stubbornly got off the bed and put on her clothes. Yu Qianqiu glanced at the bed that was dotted with red spots. Then he looked at Furong's strange walking posture. He thought to himself, oh no, it was Furong's first night yesterday. I was a little too indulgent. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. How are you going to send me off like this? Aren't you afraid that others will see through you? No, After walking a few steps, she also realized that something was wrong. She couldn't say the rest of her words. Yu Qianqiu walked downstairs to stop her. He gently whispered in her ear, be obedient. There's no need to send me off. I just want to tell you that I will always think of you. You just wait for me in Wanfen Garden. You have to work hard to cultivate. Do you understand? Yes. Furong nodded, feeling wronged. Yu Qianqiu gently pushed her away. He opened the door and flew straight to Penglai Pavilion on his sword. He faintly heard the sound of crying. In front of Penglai Pavilion, 5 nascent soul stage disciples and 10 core formation stage disciples led by Elder Quan of the Cultivation Pavilion were ready to leave. There were many onlookers. Yu Qianqiu saw his master Guan Weiwu waving at him from the crowd. He couldn't help but feel touched. This muddle-headed master actually remembered that he was leaving today. It was really rare. Thus, he happily ran over and bowed, saying, Disciple will be leaving now. Master, please take care. I know. Guan Weiwu scratched his head and suddenly said with a voice transmission, the leader, Quan Deming, is my junior brother. I have already told him that if you have any trouble, you can look for him. He will help you. Yu Qianqiu thanked him and returned to the group. Suddenly, he heard another voice transmission, Humph. Furong didn't return last night. Did she spend the night at your place? Damn. It was father-in-law Fei's voice. Yu Qianqiu looked around and found Ferdinand, who was glaring at him in the crowd. He was stunned. He had already slept with his daughter. What else could he say? Yu Qianqiu bowed respectfully. After talking with the sect leader, Quan Deming and Elder Quan returned to the front of the group. He glanced at everyone and shouted in a deep voice, let's go. With that, he took the lead and flew away on his sword. Swoosh swoosh. 15 flying swords shot out and 15 figures quickly followed. Below, countless people showed envious eyes. The wind whistled in Yu Qianqiu's ears. He slightly slowed down and looked back in the direction of the alchemy pavilion. He didn't know if that woman was still crying in his room. He felt guilty and exhaled. He suddenly turned back and his sword turned into a stream of light. He quickly chased after the group in front of him. Chapter 161. No one knew when the original Cultivation Alliance was from. To put it bluntly, it was just something with an undeserved reputation. This time, it was different. Ong Guangceng caused a series of troubles. In the end, everyone had to clean up after him. Even Fuxian Island was not at ease. In view of this, the major sects finally made up their minds to enrich the Cultivation Alliance and make it work. They could not always make everyone suffer because of one sect. There must be justice for everything. This was the purpose of the Cultivation Alliance. Of course, the so-called Cultivation Alliance was something created by the righteous sections. It had nothing to do with the demonic sections. There were probably hundreds of righteous sects in the entire Huaxia Empire. There were major sects like Fuxian Island that had tens of thousands of disciples. There were also small sects that only had one disciple. These small sects even had only one disciple. After discussion, the Cultivation Alliance would be managed by the top 10 sections. The executive director would be changed every year, and the top 10 sects would take turns taking charge. The purpose was naturally to ensure the so-called fairness. The first year was this year, starting from Fuxian Island. As for sects other than the top 10 sects, those who were willing to join the Cultivation Alliance would more or less send someone to be responsible for the liaison work. The top 10 sects would still play the leading role. In fact, there were many small sects that were unwilling to join. For them, the disadvantages were greater than the advantages. Not to mention the constraints, the small sects would not dare to cause trouble and ask the Cultivation Alliance to uphold justice. Who would be like on Kwangtsung and run to provoke the demonic sect's evil blood devil palace? Wouldn't that be courting death? But they had to join. The top 10 sects issued a declaration. Any decent sects that did not join the Cultivation Alliance would have to pray for their own good if they encountered any trouble in the future. This meant that if they did not join, they would not be able to do anything alone. It would be very eye-catching and easy to be bullied. There would not even be anyone to help them. However, the top 10 sects did not blindly bully the small sections. For example, the Cultivation Alliance's normal operating expenses were completely shared by the top 10 sections. They would not let the small sects pay a single cent. The only requirement was that anyone who joined must obey the decisions made by the Cultivation Alliance. Otherwise, the consequences would be severe. For the sake of fairness, the Cultivation Alliance was not placed in any of the righteous sections. The 10 major sects jointly invested in a building in the 100 Flowers Valley, a place that was neither righteous nor demonic, to serve as the organization's headquarters. Yu Qianqiu and the others did not know about this at first. When they followed Quan Deming to the 100 Flowers Valley, Yu Qianqiu was shocked. Why was the Cultivation Alliance here? Thinking about it, he felt relieved. It was probably only here that no one would have any objections. Otherwise, no one would feel at ease putting it in anyone's home. He didn't know what to do if he bumped into Yan Zixia again. This was something that Yu Qianqiu was a little worried about. After all, he had taken advantage of her, and it wasn't just 1 or 2 meals. He didn't even let go of her curvy body parts. It would be awkward to see him again. As the saying goes, what you fear will happen. As soon as they entered the 100 Flowers Valley, although the palace master of the 100 Flowers Valley didn't come personally, she sent a son, a daughter, and a group of disciples to welcome the guests. Everyone was in the cultivation world. Although supporting Immortal Island only had a dozen or so people, they represented a sect. Therefore, they still had to show the necessary etiquette. As soon as they entered the valley, they saw an extraordinary young man and a beautiful woman standing at the city gate. Both of them cupped their fists and bowed to Quan Deming. Yan Zhuixing, Yan Zixia, I represent my mother to welcome the seniors from supporting Immortal Island. Quan Deming smiled and greeted them politely. He didn't dare to put on airs of the world's #1 sect in front of them. Others might not know, but how could he not know? The so-called mother was his senior sister, the daughter of his master's previous sect master, Guan Dinghai. As soon as Yu Qianqiu entered the city, he noticed Yan Zixia. Fortunately, he had always liked to keep a low profile. When he entered, he stood at the back. When the situation turned bad, he immediately hid behind everyone. He didn't know if the other party saw him or not. The people from supporting Immortal Island and the people who came to welcome them walked in. There were many people watching. They were all individual cultivators, both righteous and demonic. The righteous and demonic path in the 100 Flowers Valley were free to come and go. Everyone was here to watch. After all, supporting Immortal Island was famous. They weren't like other sects who often had people outside. It was rare for supporting Immortal Island to send a group of people. It was inevitable that they wanted to see the glory of the world's #1 sect. The place where the 100 Flowers Palace welcomed supporting Immortal Island was at the 100 Flowers house. It wasn't the first time Yu Qianqiu had been here. When they arrived at the entrance of the 100 Flowers house, the people from the other sects of the Cultivation Alliance had already arrived. There were hundreds of people waiting there. The leaders of the sects all came to say a few words to Quan Deming. Yu Qianqiu glanced at the crowd. There were quite a few familiar faces. He seemed to have seen the leader of the Moon Clan when he was in the Demon region. The few female disciples behind him were also very familiar. The leader of Ong Kwangsung was actually Lu Wanwan, an old acquaintance. The person behind him was even more familiar. It was Lu Jingguang, whom he had once stripped naked. Damn! This was going to be interesting. What day was it today? What a sin! Yu Qianqiu groaned in pain. His body shrank in the crowd. There was a saying that went, "You can hide now, but you can't hide forever." He was so big, and supporting Immortal Island was so eye-catching. Where could he hide? There was another saying that went even better, "Women are more careful than men." This was even more true. A female disciple of the Moon Clan glanced over and was stunned. Then, she whispered something in the elder's ear. The elder of the Moon Clan's eyes lit up. He looked at Yu Qianqiu, who was hiding behind the crowd, sneakily. The elder of the Moon Clan, Hua Rui, suddenly chuckled and said, "Elder Quan, I heard that your outstanding disciple, Yu Qianqiu, is also here." "Who is it? Can I have a look?" "Yu Qianqiu is here. Elder Quan, we have to ask him to come and see." The Daluo sect was also in an uproar. In the eyes of the other sects, they were a little surprised to see such a scene. Who was this Yu Qianqiu? He was so famous that even the first and second sects of the Orthodox sects were so eager to see him. Of course, they didn't know that the trial in the Demon region was a secret between the top 3 sects of the Orthodox and Devil sections. Ong Kwangsung's Lu Wanwan and Lu Jingguang exchanged a look. They were both confused. The name Yu Qianqiu was so familiar. Yan Zixia, who was standing at the entrance of the 100 Flowers house, looked around the crowd of Fuxian Island and finally saw the familiar figure hiding behind the crowd. Yu Qianqiu, come out and greet the seniors of the various sections. Quan Deming smiled and turned around. Bitch! I'll sell you to Africa. Would it kill you to speak less? Yu Qianqiu hated him to death. There were too many people. To prevent him from squeezing out, the disciples of Fuxian Island automatically made way for him, revealing his true appearance. He had no choice. He would be killed no matter what he did. Yu Qianqiu smiled awkwardly at the crowd and walked over. Lu Wanqian and Lu Jingguang were shocked at the same time. There were many people with the same name and surname in this world, but if they had the same name and surname and also had the same appearance, then they could only be the same person. Moreover, Yu Qianqiu's name was rarely seen. The other Ong Kwangsung disciples also looked at Yu Qianqiu in shock. Lu Jingguang, who was still in shock, wanted to step out and question them. However, he was stopped by Lu Wanwan the moment he took a step out. Lu Wanwan shook his head gently and winked at the people of supporting Immortal Island, hinting him not to be rash. Lu Jingguang looked at the people of the world's #1 sect and held back the impulse in his heart. He had no choice but to hold back. He heard that the people of Fuxian Island were all extraordinary. The elder in charge was at the tribulation stage and there were 5 late-stage nascent soul cultivators. On his side, the elder in charge was only at the mid-stage nascent soul realm. Although there were 5 nascent soul realm elders, they couldn't defeat them. This was the difference between the world's #1 and #5. The difference was huge. Chapter 162. Yu Qianqiu was most concerned about Ong Kwangsung's group. Their actions were all seen by him. It seemed that Fuxian Island's name was really famous. Just their signboard alone was enough to intimidate people. The corner of his mouth curled up into a smile. He already had an idea in his mind, so he immediately felt relaxed. Fu Xian Island's core formation stage disciple, Yu Qianqiu, greets seniors. Yu Qianqiu smiled and cupped his hands at the people around him. Hua Rui giggled and said, "You are Yu Qianqiu. The last time I saw you, you were only at the foundation establishment stage, right? How long has it been? You have already broken through to the core formation stage. You are indeed an outstanding disciple of Fu Xian Island." The Luo sect's principal elder was called Zhu Xianxian. Although he didn't go to the demon ghost region, he had heard of Yu Qianqiu. He immediately walked over with a smile and grabbed Yu Qianqiu's arm. He patted it and said, "You are indeed extraordinary, extraordinary." Ha! Senior, you flatter me. Yu Qianqiu took this opportunity to quietly withdraw his hand. He did not have a good impression of the Deluo sect, and sooner or later, he would come looking for them to settle the score. As a man, there was no justice in not taking revenge. Everyone saw that the three sects were speaking in riddles. They didn't know what was so good about Yu Qianqiu. While they were wondering, Yu Qianqiu walked toward Ong Guangsong with a smile. "Lu Wanqian, Lu Jingguang, long time no see. How have you been?" Yu Qianqiu stood in front of the two. His smile gradually turned into a sneer. The originally lively surroundings suddenly became silent. Anyone could see that Yu Qianqiu and Ong Guangsong had a grudge. Otherwise, he wouldn't have called him by his name in public. Yan Zixia frowned. She had carefully investigated Yu Qianqiu's background and naturally knew that Yu Qianqiu used to be Ong Guangsong's disciple. Now that he had joined another sect, it was taboo in the cultivation world. Why did he provoke him instead of hiding from Ong Guangsong? Quan Deming was astonished as well. How did Yu Qianqiu get involved with the Blue Light School? He hoped that nothing bad would happen to him. Before this brat even arrived, many people had already greeted him and asked him to watch out for him. Guan Weiwu, Ferdinand, O Sihai, Feng Xiangtian, Guan Dinghai, and the old consecrator Ma Jiugu. Each of them had a higher rank than the other. Lu Wanqian's expression changed. He also didn't know what Yu Qianqiu was up to, but he definitely didn't want to have any conflict with supporting Immortal Island. If it wasn't for supporting Immortal Island, Ong Guangsong would have already been eliminated by the Blood Demon Palace. He put on a smile and said, "This little brother from supporting Immortal Island is called Yu Qianqiu, right? I don't think we know you." Hearing his words, Yan Zixia was stunned. Her brother Yan Zhuixing's eyes flickered as he glanced at the crowd. No one knew what he was thinking. "Yo! Elder Lu, you are really forgetful. I almost died in your hands back then. Have you forgotten so quickly?" "No, I'm afraid you think I'm already dead." Yu Qianqiu's tone was strange and aggressive. "Humph. I've never seen you before." Lu Wanqian ignored him and cupped his hands at Quan Deming. "Elder Quan, what is the meaning of this? Are you trying to bully us?" Looking at Lu Wanqian's secretive behavior, the people around them didn't say anything and just watched the show. However, Ong Guangsong was embarrassed. No matter what, it was a big sect in the cultivation world. Yet, it was being pressured by a little disciple from supporting Immortal Island. Lu Jingguang glared at him and trembled with anger. With his status in Ong Guangsong, he had never been humiliated like this in public. Quan Deming stroked his beard and pondered. Yu Qianqiu said that he almost died in his hands back then. It seemed like they were enemies of life and death. This matter was a little troublesome. Yu Qianqiu wasn't an ordinary disciple. After thinking about it, he shouted, "Yu Qianqiu, don't mess around." Yu Qianqiu choked with anger. He paused and bowed to Quan Deming. "Yes, elder." When he turned around and saw Lu Jingguang, he couldn't help but mock him. You look like you want to bite me. Clean face and no beard. Who doesn't know that you were castrated by the demonic path? The whole Onkwangtsung almost brought the destruction of the sect because of you. Why are you here pretending to be a pretty boy? Humph. The crowd was in an uproar. Not many people knew that Lu Jingguang was castrated. When Yu Qianqiu revealed it, it was a little shocking. Everyone knew his status in Onkwangtsung. If that was the case, there was a reason why Onkwangtsung went against the demonic path. The world's #1 sect was indeed the #1 sect. They even knew such a secret. Those sects who had participated in the demon-slaying conference organized by Onkwangtsung immediately understood everything. Onkwangtsung used the name of demon-slaying conference to take advantage of everyone for revenge. Those sects had more or less suffered great losses. Some sects were even directly destroyed by the demonic path. In an instant, countless hateful eyes stared at Onkwangtsung and the others. Stop right there. Lu Jingguang was about to go crazy. With such a secret exposed, even a man wouldn't be able to withstand it. He immediately rushed out and was about to fight Yu Qianqiu. The two of them were very close to each other. Before anyone could react, Lu Jingguang and Yu Qianqiu had already engaged in close combat. The former punched the latter's head. Yu Qianqiu turned around and grabbed his arm with a backhand. With the other hand, he punched his face twice quickly. Then, he grabbed the back of his neck and raised his knee to hit him twice. Finally, he pushed his hand away and raised his leg high, sending Lu Jingguang flying. Fortunately, there were many people behind him. Onkwangtsung's disciples had already caught him. However, his whole face had already become a bloody mess and he was unconscious. In fact, Yu Qianqiu had seen through Lu Jingguang's cultivation at a glance. He was only at the late stage of foundation establishment. Therefore, he deliberately provoked him. He wanted him to make the first move and then find an excuse to beat him up. Who knew that this silly bird would be so angry that he actually wanted to have a one-on-one fight with him? Wasn't this courting death? One had to know that Yu Qianqiu had mingled in the underworld in his previous life. His position as the boss was obtained through punches and kicks. There was no need to mention his one-on-one experience. It wasn't a problem for him to fight several people at once. How could this Onkwangtsung's eldest young master be his opponent? In the end, in just a few moves, while everyone was still in a daze, Lu Jingguang had already been sent flying by a kick. People in the cultivation world were used to fighting with cultivation and spells. How many people would fight like this? Yu Qianqiu's movements were as smooth as flowing water. He was too skilled. He was simply too handsome. Everyone was dumbfounded. This Yu Qianqiu was worthy of being an outstanding disciple of supporting Immortal Island. He could even fight hand to hand. He was indeed not bad. The disciples of supporting Immortal Island were even more impressed. This Yu Qianqiu shocked everyone with just one move. He really made supporting Immortal Island proud. Actually, as a man, it was not bad to show off his masculine charm occasionally, especially when it came to fists and kicks. It was very lethal to women. For example, Yan Zixia and the female disciples of the Moon Clan were all amazed. Little bastard, you actually dared to hit me. Do you want to die? There were many unreasonable things in the world. It was not the first time that the villain first complained. For example, between the one who hit and the one who was hit, Yu Qianqiu shouted coldly and wanted to rush over to beat him up again. Onkwangtsung and the others weren't useless. The grandson of the sect leader was beaten up because he didn't react in time. Now that he was beaten up again, he wouldn't be able to show his face in public anymore. Immediately, a few people drew their swords and pointed them at Yu Qianqiu. Hey! This time, supporting Immortal Island didn't want to be outdone. A few people flashed over and stood in front of Yu Qianqiu, pointing their swords at him. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library. YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.